Chapter 909. Miss Lin Yu. Renbochan didn't know whether to call her Miss Lin Yu or something else. In any case, he knew that he definitely couldn't call her an old monster. He might as well call her Miss based on her appearance. Renbochan inexplicably thought of the Empress. After 100 years, he would be old, but the Empress would still have this appearance. He would have to call her Miss. What do you know about the history of the human race? Renbochan asked. I don't know. I only found out after listening to you guys. Why are you asking me about this? Lin Yu looked puzzled. It had to be said that this expression of hers made her look naive and sweet. However, thinking about her age, Renbochan felt that she might have been living like a dog at this age. Renbochan thought of someone who might be about the same age as her, living like a dog at the same age. However, the two of them were two different things. That person ate, slept, and lived a pig's life with a clear conscience. Besides, according to the lifespan of the race, that person wasn't even an adult yet. However, the person in front of him was different. Renbochan coughed and looked at her with a strange expression. When we talked about the history of the human race just now, I saw your strange expression and thought that you knew something. Lin Yu thought for a while and then suddenly realized something. I was just lamenting that such a small thing could actually be so destructive. Everyone was speechless. This was no longer a problem with the length of the reflex arc. Was there something wrong with her brain? Renbochan felt that he should get someone to check on Lin Yu's situation. If it wasn't for the fact that her strength couldn't be faked, he would have suspected that she was a fake. With such a brain, how could she have lived for so many years without being sold into a ravine? He put aside the matter of Lin Yu for now. Everyone, Chief Lin has mentioned some things before. I can tell you that it's all true. As for the evidence, Senior Li Fu has some of it, and Jinren Li has seen some of it. If you want to know, I can let you take a look. This is the purpose of this time. If the human experts continue to fight among themselves, we will never have a chance to go back. I hope to gather all the experts into one fist and support the high-end forces of the human race when we go back. If this was before, I wouldn't have passed on this responsibility. However, after seeing that scene just now, a person's martial strength is already worthless in front of such a powerful weapon, Gao Yi said frankly. There wasn't any sense of dejection from him, but his words were from the bottom of his heart. Not only him, but the others also felt the same way. The upper limit of a martial artist is not limited to this. Renbochan shook his head and said, this place is called the Barren Land, the land of exile. Can't you think of why? There were some things that were abundant in that area, but very rare here. Therefore, it was extremely difficult for a martial artist to break through. However, to be able to become one of the top experts in the world, one's innate talent and aptitude are extremely high. If there's a chance, one can soar to the sky in one go. Renbochan's words lifted everyone's spirits. As long as one practiced martial arts, there was no one who didn't want to climb to a higher level. There was no one who didn't want to grasp more power. Most of the people who had come were here to fish in troubled waters. However, if one were to look for the real reason, it was to seek opportunities to advance. Thus, even with the name of the world's number one, Li Fu, as a deterrent, these people still came here because of a little bit of news. Therefore, Renbochan's words immediately tempted them. After all, they didn't understand the strength of the foreign races, and they had seen Renbochan's big treasure. As such, they weren't very worried about fighting with the foreign races. Don't think too highly of things. Back then, the human race was hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than it is today. What was the final outcome? Li Fu poured a bucket of cold water on them. As long as we take a step out, it proves that we have personally torn up the agreement from back then. As long as the other party attacks, it will be a massacre, and we will become the sinners of the human race. Everyone was shocked. Su Gongso was surprised and asked, were those so-called foreign races that powerful? If it weren't for the fact that there were still experts among the human race who had the ability to fight to the death, I'm afraid that these 100,000 people wouldn't have survived. With our strength, we were just elite soldiers at that time, Li Fu said in a deep voice. Don't think so seriously. Ren Baqian waved his hand. If Li Fu continued to speak, he was afraid that everyone would be frightened. You have seen my big treasure. How powerful is it? It's indeed terrifying. Li Fu had to admit. If I throw 100 or 1,000 of them down, even a god would have to kneel. Let alone some foreign races. Of course, the other party's experts are indeed terrifying. None of us can stop them, and if they rush over, it will be a massacre. Therefore, we only need to ensure that we can contend with them in terms of high-end strength. Even if we can only restrain them, it will be enough. Since all of you can reach your current level in this barren land, why can't you advance further in that land? As for the ordinary experts of the other party, you don't need to worry about them, no matter how many there are. Ren Baqian said confidently. Even if there were no radioactive elements in this world, as long as there was oxygen, as long as the top could restrain them, the middle and lower levels could be flattened with heavy firepower. Sigh. Li Fu sighed softly. It won't be so easy to advance further. Isn't there always an opportunity? If we can't go back, do we have to pass this burden to our children and grandchildren? The strong will always be strong, and the weak will always be weak. Retreating to a corner is just a struggle for survival. Are you all willing to do that? Think about it. There is a boundless world out there, a more prosperous land, an environment where it is easier to make breakthroughs, and a higher upper limit. Among all of you here, it is not impossible for some of you to be like the human emperor. What I want to do is to organize a group of people to go to that world to train. What you are worried about, old man, is nothing more than being discovered by them before we reach that stage and causing a disaster. What if we put an eye in the sky? We can see every move of the other party. The enemy is in the light while we are in the dark. What is there to worry about? Ren Baqian laughed. Put an eye in the sky. Everyone was shocked by Ren Baqian's words. Even Li Fu revealed a shocked expression. This was really a fantastic idea. Well, in fact, everyone wanted to say that it was absurd. How could it be possible? I know how to do it. Let us look down on the entire world as if we are in the sky. Of course, this will take some time. As long as we can do this, there is no need to worry. Can you really do it? Li Fu still couldn't believe it. When it's done, we will go out. Ren Baqian spread his hands. Before that, we still have some things to do anyway. Your goal is Great Xiao. Ma Hongyu frowned and asked. She had heard from Lin Dong that the Aboriginals and the people of the other countries were part of the human race. In fact, the fact that the Aboriginals stayed behind to defend the 60,000 mountains was worthy of respect. However, how could they easily let go of the people of Great Xiao? No. Ren Baqian waved his hand. I don't care about the land of Great Xiao. My goal is to put it outside. As I said before, I need experts who have the potential to advance further. Ren Baqian stretched out his hand and grabbed. Clench all the experts in the world into a fist. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. How bold was it to take all the experts in the world into one's own pocket? However, after thinking about it, it wasn't impossible. The number 1, 3rd, 4th, 8th, 9th, and 10th experts in the world were all here. Half of the top 30 experts in the world were here. As long as they were dealt with, the others might have a chance. They finally understood Ren Baqian's idea. You said to put an eye in the sky. Can it really be done? A voice suddenly came from the crowd, causing Ren Baqian's eyes to twitch. He saw Lin Yu's small mouth open in disbelief. Chapter 9-10. When everyone went down the mountain, Renbachien received a lot of attention. This was probably the first time that everyone didn't look at the Empress. Instead, they were all focused on him. Whether it was the court officials, the students of the academy, or the winged cavalry, many people looked at him with awe. It was as if they were facing the Empress. Renbachien finally saw such a look in their eyes. To be honest, it felt pretty good. After all, he had been looked at as a gigolo for so long. A gigolo also had dignity. Your Majesty, seal off this place. No one can enter. Pay attention to the situation here at all times. There must be many teams of people patrolling every day, wearing protective clothing, and they can't stay overnight in this area. This area is 50 kilometers. Renbachien whispered into the Empress's ear. So cautious. What exactly will happen? The Empress asked. It's hard to say. Radiation is harmful to the human body, so we can't use nuclear bombs to blow them up. If that happens, no one will be able to stay there. In addition, it may cause mutations in plants and animals. I hope there won't be any impact, Renbachien said after some thought. There was no one on Earth who did not know about the threat of radiation. Everyone, we will wait here for a day, Renbachien said to the crowd. They didn't make a decision immediately as they still needed to go to the underground palace to take a look. However, they couldn't get off this pirate ship. There were some things that couldn't be left once they heard it. Therefore, Renbachien threw 2 nuclear bombs and prepared to throw another one to give them the illusion that these things were conventional weapons. If you don't want me to throw a 4th bomb at your head, of course, everyone understood that they were actually having an internal struggle. Don't think too much. Our goal is for everyone to unite against the foreign races. Other than that, there won't be any impact on you. Renbachien always spoke with a kind smile, which had almost become his signature expression. It was naturally the same at this time. Everyone nodded. Some of them stayed behind, while the rest flew off into the distance. Before going to Lawn City, they still had to inform their disciples and attendants in the distance. Zhao Prince Consort, I have something to ask you. After dinner, Renbachien heard a voice. He turned his head and saw Li Yuanzhu standing in the dark. Renbachien nodded at the Empress, walked over to Li Yuanzhu, and asked, What's the matter, Jinrenli? She looked into the distance and asked, Su Xianxian, how are you going to deal with him? Renbachien turned his head to look at her side profile, which gave off an otherworldly vibe. It was as if the Empress was looking down on all living beings from a tall iceberg. She, on the other hand, was floating above the world and looked at everyone with pity. The two of them had completely opposite personalities and temperaments, but the final result was extremely similar. She attained the spirit will level at the age of 17, condensed a heaven-grade weapon at the age of 21, and became the 3rd most powerful expert in the world at the age of 23. Now, she was 29 years old, 2 years older than the Empress. Ever since she became a spirit will expert, she had fought a total of 42 times in front of others without killing a single person. The number of times he injured people was extremely few. Renbachien was silent for a while. He chose the wrong path. He hadn't paid much attention to Su Xianxian before. The scene on the mountain had also surprised him. However, there were hundreds of kinds of people, and experts also had different temperaments. This person seemed to be somewhat hostile to Dao and looked down on Renbachien. When he realized that Renbachien was the one who spoke, he immediately mocked and left. If he could let such a person go, what about the other experts? Renbachien's thoughts turned into flowing water. Therefore, he couldn't let this person go no matter what angle he looked at it from. Luohua sect isn't a big sect, and they only have 200 to 300 disciples including handymen and maids. Su Xianxian was wrong, but the others weren't. Li Yuanzhu turned her head and looked at Rinpochen with eyes that were as calm as water. Zhao Prince Consort, can you let those people go? Rinpochen suddenly felt like laughing. In fact, he had a good impression of Li Yuanzhu, and he owed her a favor back then. Furthermore, she didn't say that he would let Su Xianxian go and only pleaded for the others. However, at this time, he wouldn't hesitate at all if the lives of hundreds or thousands of people could intimidate all the experts and let everyone see the truth. Unless I see Su Xianxian's head. Rinpochen said resolutely. I'll go. Li Yuanzhu's words shocked Rinpochen. You? Rinpochen was surprised. One had to know that Li Yuanzhu had never killed anyone since she became famous. Now, she actually said that she was going to take someone's head. As you said, Su Xianxian chose the wrong path. I know what you want, and I also know that you can't be soft-hearted. However, if he dies and the others can live, then let him die. Li Yuanzhu's voice was full of inexplicable emotions. It seemed like pity, it seemed like a sigh, but it also seemed like there was something else. If Rinpochen were to directly throw a nuclear bomb at them, all the experts would know what to do. However, since Li Yuanzhu said so, he couldn't object. After all, she was the third most powerful expert in the world. Among these experts, the Empress and Li Yuanzhu had the greatest potential. Moreover, Li Yuanzhu personally killing people would have a considerable deterrent effect. Most importantly, Li Yuanzhu's choice had already explained her attitude. She came into contact with these things only half a month earlier than the others, but this ethereal woman made a decision even earlier than Li Fu. Although this decision made Rinpochen feel gratified, he also didn't expect it. After all, she had previously decided to go to the 60,000 mountains to see the foreign races with her own eyes. He didn't expect her to make a decision so quickly. It was so fast that Rinpochen found it abrupt. I'll give it half a year. Rinpochen said. I'll do my best. Li Yuanzhu's robe fluttered in the night wind. Rinpochen slowly walked away with his hands behind his back, leaving only a sentence that floated in the wind. It's a pity to dirty your hands. Li Yuanzhu stretched out her hand in front of her. Dirty, my hands. In front of her was a fair palm with slender fingers that didn't look rough at all. Senior sister, have you decided? A person appeared behind Li Yuanzhu and stared blankly at the figure in front of him. I've decided. Li Yuanzhu said faintly. Isn't it too fast? Li Fu, Lin Dong, and Blood River Ghost, none of these people are lying. The scene I saw in the underground palace has always appeared in my mind these days. Remember what I said back then? What I saw was the bloody struggle of my human ancestors. A voice told me that this was the path I wanted to take and that this was my destiny. I was born for this, and so was Qi Zixiao and Rinpochen. Since that's the case, why delay? Li Yuanzhu said casually. It was rare for Ning Qing to not be talkative, but she looked worried. What Li Yuanzhu didn't say was that she saw someone in the scene, who looked exactly like her. Chapter 9-11. When they returned, there were 60 more people than when they left. Some of them even brought along their own disciples. For example, Gluttonous Duke and Ma Hongyu. Along the way, the Aboriginal ministers and the world-famous experts traveled together. Occasionally, Qi Zixiao and Li Yuanzhu would chat a little. Qin Chuan always wanted to find someone to test the sharpness of his saber. Tong Zhenye, the old man, would look at those people every day with his eyes darting around. No one knew what was going through his mind. Lian Liang, as always, was indifferent to life and death. If he was unconvinced, he would just fight. He had never lost a challenge, nor had he ever won a fight. He had challenged several experts in succession. If it weren't for the fact that the other party respected Rinpochen and Qi Zixiao, his bones would have turned cold by now. It had to be said that although the ancient race's elders were powerful, their chances of winning a head-on battle against these world-renowned experts were extremely slim. On the way back to the city, both sides sparred many times, and both sides had their own distinct characteristics. The characteristics of the Aboriginals were their ferocious strength, tyrannical bodies, and straightforward behavior. The heaven-grade weapons of these spirit wool experts were all different, and their abilities were varied. Furthermore, their moves were exquisite. For example, Renbachian always felt that Ma Hongyu should be called Ma Liang. With a single stroke, the ground turned into a swamp. Green trees, boulders, and a rain of arrows flew over, throwing everyone into a fluster. Ma Hongyu's attacks were not considered ferocious, but they were ever-changing. It was impossible to guard against them, and they were extremely difficult to deal with. Su Gongso's divine weapon was a huge hand that was dozens of feet wide. When it slammed down, it was like Mount Tai crushing down, covering the sky and covering the sun. Furthermore, there was a set of sun, moon, and stars in his palm, which could be used to hit people. When the fire snake Tao Qin attacked, the sky was filled with scarlet chains. These people's attacks were an eye-opener for him. However, the Aboriginals had a secret technique that stimulated the blood energy in one's body and greatly increased one's strength for a short period of time. The Empress usually needed a month to recover after using it. As for the others, their strength didn't increase by as much and their recovery period was even longer. If they were to fight with their lives on the line and use this trump card, Renbachian felt that Shi Wanya, Li Qianqiu, and a few other protector generals would be able to put up a fight against these top spirit wool experts. Qin Chuan and Tong Zhinya also had a chance against the experts ranked below 20th place. As for the others, they had no chance of winning. Of course, if they were to face an ordinary spirit wool expert, the situation would be reversed. Generally speaking, the ratio of Aboriginal experts was relatively high, and those who had just entered the Cardinal Heaven stage were stronger than ordinary spirit wool experts. However, they were still at a disadvantage when it came to top experts. On the way back to Lan City, Renbachian saw Lin Yu a few times. She always looked like she was thinking hard about something. Renbachian suspected that she was thinking about the dinner yesterday or the day before. There seemed to be something wrong with this expert's brain. It wasn't until they arrived at Lan City that Lin Yu suddenly found him and said bashfully, can I ask you something?" "What?" "I've seen your big treasure and heard so many secrets. Does that mean I can't get off this pirate ship?" Lin Yu looked conflicted. Renbachian looked at her and thought, have you been thinking about this matter for the past few days? Had he finally figured it out? What do you think? Renbachian revealed a kind smile. The other party looked at Renbachian, lowered his head, and thought for a while. He then looked up at Renbachian, lowered his head again, and thought for a while. Finally, he nodded and said, "Oh." He ran to the side and continued to rack his brains. Renbachian was also racking his brains. He was racking his brains to figure out how this person's brain worked. Although there were hundreds of people and hundreds of experts, it wasn't strange to occasionally see someone with a hole in their brain. Even though it wasn't strange, ordinary people wouldn't dare to believe it. Would anyone dare to believe that the 20th most powerful expert in the world was like this? Renbachian felt that there was something wrong with her cultivation and that her brain was affected. He would wait for the rearguard commandery to send someone to investigate and hope that there would be results. It took a few days to return to Lan City and everyone went straight to the palace. Together with the people from Qinchuan and the court officials who stayed behind in Lan City. As a result, there were more than 40 Cardinal Heaven experts, which made those top experts secretly apprehensive. Although there were many top experts in Great Xia, they were in a state of disunity. On the surface, there were only 3 spirit wool experts in Great Xia's imperial court. At most, there were a few hidden experts in the palace, and they were extremely few in number. However, Dayo was different. With the Empress as the leader, there were at least 50 Cardinal Heaven experts in the Imperial Court and the 5 protectorates. It could be said that no power in the world could compare to Dayo. On the way back to the palace, Renbochin noticed something unusual. After entering the palace, the Empress ordered the people beside her, "Send someone to inform everyone that there will be a banquet at Zichan Palace Hall tonight." Renbochin pulled Exange aside and asked, "Have you caught him?" Exange looked a little distressed. "Your Highness, I can't hear you clearly." "I said, have you caught him?" Renbochin had no choice but to raise his voice. "What?" "I said, have you caught him?" Renbochin raised his voice again by 10 decibels, and people in the distance looked over. "Caught him." Exange finally heard what Renbochin said. "Is he dead or alive?" Renbochin shouted. "His internal organs have been smashed into pieces." Exange shouted. The expressions of the people in the palace suddenly became subtle. He had never thought that loud noises could be so terrifying. In addition, half of the people in the palace had poor hearing these days. Renbochin nodded. The roaring emperor and the loudspeaker were indeed a perfect match. "I will take you to get your hearing checked in a few days." "What?" "It's fine." Renbochin waved his hand. Zhao Prince Consort. Great Elder Shurqin came over and put on a fake smile. "I'm old and can't take such a big shock. You almost killed me. Also, all the windows in my house are broken. What do you say about this?" "I spent a lot of money to buy them from the Royal Glass Shop. I'll compensate you." Renbochin laughed. "I'll replace all the windows in your house with glass." The outcome of this battle was a little beyond his expectations. Exange Shui was dead, and the power of his voice was stronger than he had expected. However, it wasn't too surprising. However, the windows in the houses of many big shots around the palace were also shattered, which meant that the impact was larger than he had expected. Needless to say, the windows in the palace couldn't be saved. Renbochin put these matters aside and led the group of experts to the underground palace. When everyone came out of the illusion, they were all silent and couldn't hide the shock in their eyes. The scene in the illusion had shocked them too much. They were originally the top experts in the world, but after seeing the illusion, they realized how big the gap was between them and the experts. Just as Li Fu had said, with their strength, they were completely ordinary in that era. In comparison, they were at most equivalent to the current level of an Earth Will expert. Then, everyone became even more excited. If the experts there were so powerful, would they have the opportunity to reach the level in the illusion when they got out? Even Lin Dong, who was quite calm before, had a flash of excitement in his eyes. Renbochin looked at everyone's expressions and smiled. Limited by his strength, he saw much less than the others in the illusion and didn't see the big battle at the end. However, he did hear about it from the Empress. Chapter 9:12. At night, Zichan Palace was brightly lit. There were hundreds of people in the palace, but very few made a sound. The Empress and Renbochin were seated at the top. On one side were the ministers of Dayo and on the other side were the experts of Great Xia. There were 2 people with special identities on the side of Dayo, Qingyun's sword and Zui Qing. In terms of strength, there was a slight gap between them and the others. However, they represented another group in Dayo, the Jing tribe. The scene in the palace made them feel inexplicably emotional. A few years ago, they were working hard on how to build a city. They didn't expect everything to change in just a few years. However, this change made them feel gratified and a little regretful. They were gratified that Renbochin's words were coming true. Those who joined the rearguard commandery were now scattered in Tianjing Basin, the Yun Nation, and Great Xia. There were also some ordinary people who lived in Lawn City and walked in the same city as the Aboriginals. Although it wasn't perfect and there were still various incidents, the two were satisfied with this change. It was a pity that the many experts who died in Tianjin Basin at that time were here. If they were still here and saw this scene, they would probably agree with the two of them. Everyone, I never thought that there would be a time when I would sit together with all of you. The Empress played with her wine glass. In fact, in her mind, she imagined the scene of her meeting with the others. She would be sitting in the main hall with the heads of the people below her. Then, she would say, suppress them under the plaza and let them become the cornerstone of Dayo. This scene was very suitable for the Empress. We didn't expect this either. In the past, we would fight to the death when we met them. Qin Chuan stroked his beard and laughed. As soon as he said this, even the people on the other side smiled. Indeed, who would have thought that one day, they would sit together with the experts of the Aboriginals? In the future, we should let go of the hatred between our races and countries. Renbaqian stood up and raised his glass. Everyone, we are all, too, humans and, for, humans. The people below looked at Renbaqian, thought about him holding a wine glass in one hand and waving a nuclear bomb in the other, and quickly made the right choice. We are all humans. Everyone said. Saying this was equivalent to making everyone's position clear. It was impossible for him to stay out of this matter. Of course, he couldn't get away from it before. Even Lin Yu, who wasn't very smart, could figure out this problem, let alone the others. The only strange thing was that this incident wasn't initiated by Great Xia, which had always been the strongest nation. Instead, it was initiated by Dayo. Furthermore, it was caused by someone who wasn't even a spirit will expert. In their memories, it had always been Great Xia that accepted others. Now, it was the other way around. The banquet was considered harmonious. Under the Empress's fists, Qin Chuan and the rest weren't able to obtain permission to perform a striptease or a real-life brawl. The Water Empress was also in high spirits, but in the end, she drank too much. Furthermore, since his kidneys had recovered, Great Elder, Her Majesty probably won't be able to attend court tomorrow. Furthermore, the discussion that was scheduled for tomorrow can't be held either. Xianzhe pried open Shi Qing's door in the middle of the night. Ha! Shi Qing was taken aback. I did. Xianzhe nodded at Shi Qing. If he hadn't asked her to do this and the Empress hadn't agreed, she wouldn't have bothered to remind him. After conveying the message, she disappeared into the darkness. In any case, she couldn't hear what Shi Qing said. Her ears had been buzzing for the past few days. Shi Qing heaved a long sigh. In the palace, it seemed like Her Majesty's Yahua Palace couldn't be saved either. He didn't know where they were going to move to this time. What? Postponed. Ning Qing jumped up before Li Yuanzhu could react when she heard the news the next day. They actually postponed such a big matter with so many super experts? They aren't sincere at all. Li Yuanzhu frowned slightly. They had clearly agreed on it yesterday, so why was it postponed today? She didn't know what was going on. Go and find out what's going on. Forget it, this isn't the Truth One Temple. It's better if you don't ask around. Others will ask around. Li Yuanzhu stopped halfway. Senior, what do you mean? Why do I feel like you are looking down on me? Ning Qing glared at her fiercely. No, your feeling is right. Li Yuanzhu changed the topic. Ning Qing immediately jumped up and bared her fangs, wanting to demand an explanation from her. In fact, at this time, the discussion between Qi Zixiao and Renbaqian had been postponed for many days without giving an explanation. Many experts were unhappy about this. There were also many people who wanted to know what was going on and didn't know if there were any unforeseen events. Otherwise, why would it be postponed suddenly? The Aboriginal officials didn't treat this matter as something that needed to be kept secret. How could a group of strippers and whistlers at a banquet be expected to think that this matter was related to the privacy of the royal family and needed to be kept secret? Not long after, the experts who understood the whole story were dumbfounded. They didn't know what kind of expression to make. Ning Qing muttered as she ran out to find out more information. After hearing from others, she immediately ran back with a red face. What did you find out? Li Yuanzhu looked at Ning Qing's face and found it funny. Oh. How could Ning Qing say that? Li Yuanzhu had a smile on her face. She felt a little strange. Although Ning Qing wasn't diligent in her training, she was still quite good at gathering gossip. How could she not find out anything? What was with her face so red? Ning Qing gritted her teeth and said, "They are consummating. It is said that they will take at least 3 to 4 days to come out." Li Yuanzhu's face quickly turned red. Shameless, scum, and vulgar. Ning Qing gritted her teeth and scolded. He is indeed a barbarian. None of the men are good. Ning Qing muttered angrily for a long time before raising her head and asking doubtfully, "Does it take so long? I don't think it's like this in the novels." "What novels?" Li Yuanzhu asked meaningfully. Her eyes were suddenly filled with an inexplicable feeling. Nothing," Ning Qing said in a panic and ran out. 4 days later, Renbaqian came out holding his waist. The Empress's palace had changed from Yaohua Palace to Fenghuan Palace. Although he was holding his waist, Renbaqian's face was full of surprise. This time, his hip bone wasn't broken, his spine was fine, his arms were fine, and his legs were fine. "We should celebrate," Renbaqian said joyfully. After considering the possibility of celebrating a second time, Renbaqian finally gave up on this idea. However, he was beaming with joy. If it were someone else, they definitely wouldn't know what he was happy about. That night, Renbaqian went to meet the experts one by one. After all, he couldn't justify standing them up for several days. When he came out from each of their places, he brought a note with him. There was a note from Su Gongso, Lin Dong, Blood River Demon, Gao Yi. Renbaqian was puzzled. Was it a trend for experts to give people kidney supplements to win them over? Furthermore, each of them had one, and there were no duplicates. Speaking of which, why did a group of experts like you carry kidney supplements with you? Are your kidneys not good? This book should be renamed as Kidney Deficiency. Only Li Yuanzhu was relatively normal. It was just that her gaze was very strange. Oh, there was also a normal person, Lin Yu. After Renbaqian left for a long time, Lin Yu slapped her head and said, "I forgot to ask why it was delayed by 5 days. Chapter 9:13. The experts at the top of the list had been waiting for the two of them to consummate for 5 days. No one would believe this, but it really happened, which left everyone speechless. Fortunately, they could officially discuss it the next day. First, the affiliation of this organization became the first hurdle. If it belonged to Deo, many experts would be the first to object. Even if Renbaqian waved a nuclear bomb and Deo took the lead from beginning to end. In any case, it can't belong to the Imperial Court of Deo. Although I don't have any feelings for Great Xia, I don't intend to become a citizen of Deo, Su Gongso said calmly. I don't agree either. I don't intend to work for any nation, Gao Yi said. I don't agree as well. After all, the Painting World Villa is still in Deo's Longjing residence, and all the disciples are from Great Xia. We are working hard for the entire human race and for our own future, not for Deo. Ma Hongyu didn't even look at the Empress, who was getting more and more upset. The Empress sat in the seat of honor and felt more comfortable with the heads of these people placed in front of her. Sure. Renbaqian grabbed the Empress's hand, held her back, and whispered in her ear, in the future, it will be interesting when they beg you to join them. Li Fu, Li Yuanzhu, and the others turned their heads and looked at Renbochin inexplicably. Beg to join them. These people. Renbochin took in everyone's expressions and sneered. Without Dayo identification cards, you won't even be able to get a phone card. You won't be able to get a bank card either. You won't be able to buy a house either. Well, these don't matter. You can be arrogant and freeload off the phone and bank cards of your disciples. However, it was hard to say how many countries there would be in the future. Even if they didn't take the initiative to occupy other countries, it would be hard to say what the other countries and people would do after the comparison between a modern and feudal society was made. The Empress took 2 deep breaths to ease the anger in her heart. We aren't doing this for one person or one country, but for ourselves and the entire human race. Renbochin smiled. Hearing this, the others heaved a sigh of relief. They were really afraid that the Empress and Renbochin would stubbornly classify this organization as a department of Dayo, which they couldn't accept no matter what. Actually, this old man doesn't care. Blood River spread his hands and said indifferently. If you can satisfy me, what's the harm in joining Dayo? The others didn't even look at him. If you want to, that's your business. Renbochin responded with a smile. Although this matter made both parties a little unhappy, it was considered to have passed smoothly with Renbochin's statement. During the lunch break, Tong Jinye went over to Renbochin's side, stroked his beard, and cursed, "Damn it, why do I feel like we are letting them off too lightly? We send them out to find a good place to cultivate, we give them food, but in the end, aren't they on our side? In the face of a formidable enemy, every bit of strength is very important, especially these people who have the opportunity to become top experts. Now, as long as they are humans, they are all on our side," Renbochin said casually. "Don't think too much. Who knows what will happen in the future?" During lunch, the Empress was still feeling a little depressed. "Your Majesty, don't think too much about it. After all, this is only the first step." Renbochin laughed. "I really don't feel happy." The Empress raised her eyebrows and looked dissatisfied. "After all, we've fought for so many years. Also, think about how they will use their connections to get a Dayo residence in the future. Wouldn't that be much better?" Renbochin teased her. The Empress shook her head and said, "It's not easy to make these people lower their heads. Like you said, we are facing a formidable enemy. There will always be a chance." Renbochin said. Although he didn't know whether his expectations could be realized, there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Of course, he definitely couldn't do anything that would be a hindrance. History had already shown that dragging one's own people down would ultimately lead to one's own downfall. Even if he couldn't make them lower their heads and take the initiative to join Dayo, it didn't matter. At that time, Dayo's wings would have hardened. On the contrary, the current situation and the early stages of entering that world were the most important. In the afternoon, the first thing to decide was the name of the organization. Helping Children Go Home Charity Organization. Li Fu looked at the name written on the paper in front of him. "Are you kidding me? This is..." Li Yuanzhu also looked up. "Am I right? Think about where we are going. Home. That is the home of the human race. All the people of Dayo are the subjects of Her Majesty. However, aren't the people of Great Xia also human beings? Furthermore, this child also includes our descendants. We don't do it for fame or profit. We just want our descendants to get rid of their wandering lives and return to their homeland. Do you think that's wrong? It seems to be right." Li Yuanzhu thought about it. It seemed to be the case and made sense, but why didn't this name sound right? "But the name isn't quite right." Ma Hongyu continued. "There's no other way. Everyone has their own preferences for names. It's just like eating, and everyone has their own preferences. Why don't you find a suitable name that can explain our purpose and let people know what we want to do at a glance? Furthermore, it has to be acceptable to everyone. Ren Baqian looked indifferent. When Ma Hongyu heard that he was being blamed, he immediately showed a constipated expression. Asking him to come up with a name was simply asking for his life. The Empress responded with a faint and unfathomable smile. In fact, she was playing the role of a bystander. They had made her unhappy in the morning, and now, it was her turn to watch the show. I think this name isn't bad. Blood River cackled. Everyone immediately glared at him. They couldn't be bothered with him in the morning, and now he popped up again. Was he trying to argue with them or was he trying to argue with them? I think it's good too. Tong Jinye laughed. It's indeed good, but the name is a little long. However, a longer name makes it more awe-inspiring. It was rare for Qin Chuan to be on the same side as Tong Jinye. Tu Wan agreed. Xiong Yaoha, it's indeed good. The Aboriginal experts immediately agreed. In any case, they were happy to see the other party unhappy. Besides, he was their Zhao Prince consort. Without the Empress's permission, who else would they support but him? Most of you agree. He chuckled. Since this organization doesn't belong to Deo, it will be up to everyone to vote for it. If the majority agrees, it will pass. If the majority doesn't, it will be rejected. What do you think? Everyone's expression was one of utter disbelief. How could they do this? More than 30 of the 50 people in the room were Aboriginals. What kind of vote was there? Zhao Prince Consort's suggestion is good. Otherwise, with so many people, who should we listen to? This is still a good idea. Tong Jinye rolled his eyes and immediately laughed. No matter how stupid he was, he knew which side had the most people and which had the least. I don't agree. Su Gongso slammed the table and glared. Oh. Otherwise. This organization is based on experts. If we don't have a constitution, won't we just argue about everything in the future? Ren Baqian said casually as he picked at his nails. You have more people. That's unfair. Fire Snake Tao Qian slammed the table and shouted. That's because we have more experts. Ren Baqian looked up and laughed. Numbers don't necessarily mean strength. Why don't we have a competition? You want to compete with my big baby? Ren Baqian chuckled. Tao Qian was speechless. As long as that thing was within a radius of 300 meters, it wouldn't even have a chance to run. What was there to compete for? That's why I said that we are still stronger. Of course, you can also bring in experts. Ren Baqian said faintly. Chapter 9:14. Tianming. Mingtang. Pu Chang. Ren Baqian sat at the head of the table and watched with a smile as the experts of Great Xia struggled to come up with silly names and then rejected them. Let's go with Zhao Prince Consorts, but we have to change it to become the Homecoming Charity Organization. Li Yuanzhu covered her forehead. After listening for a long time, she felt that these people's ability to come up with names was really worrying. Besides, this matter wasn't that important, so there was no need to dwell too much on it. Only then did everyone reluctantly agree. Ren Baqian also felt that this was a trivial matter and moved on to the next item. It was about the structure of this so-called organization. A snake can't be without a head. If we can't carry out orders, this organization will eventually fall into internal strife. In my opinion, we can set up a leader and 2 deputy leaders to decide daily affairs. The others will receive different treatments according to their contributions in order to prevent people from not putting in the effort. After all, we will be facing an enemy that is 10 times or even dozens of times stronger than us, and we can't afford to make any mistakes. Everyone looked solemn when they heard Rinpoche's words. The previous names were trivial, and what was in front of them was the real issue. As for your treatment, whether it is in terms of strength or as the initiators of this organization, your treatment can't be equal to that of other warriors. In the future, there will be all kinds of benefits in the organization, including martial arts that can be used for reference, better training locations, various materials needed for training, and even radio stations, unmanned surveillance drones, and tablet computers can be obtained from the organization. However, as I said, the specific benefits you will receive will depend on what you do for the organization. Rinpoche said slowly. Everyone nodded after some thought. This was feasible. For people at their level, those things were no longer important. However, there would still be comparisons between warriors who were close in strength. There was no first place in literature and second place in martial arts. This had been the case since ancient times, and it was the same in other aspects. However, what were radio stations, unmanned surveillance drones, and tablet computers? There are 3 factors that determine your treatment. The first is the number and quality of the people we absorb into the organization. As I said before, this organization is for all of us. Our goal is for all of us to be united and form an effective fighting force in the future war. Therefore, we must absorb other experts into the organization. They have always been our goal. Super experts, and martial artists with potential. Every person that was recruited would be evaluated in terms of strength, potential, character, and other aspects, and this evaluation would be included in everyone's contribution. The higher the contribution, the better the treatment. Moreover, when the war starts in the future, everyone will be able to mobilize more manpower. At this point, Rinpoche laughed and said, to put it bluntly, it might not sound nice. However, all of you need to remember one thing. What we're doing is for all of humanity. Recruiting experts was not for the sake of scoring points, but to increase the strength of the organization and the strength of the human race. If all the experts of the human race are in a state of disunity, how can we achieve anything in the end? After all, we've already fallen behind for 7,000 years. Those strange races are recuperating in our homeland, while we're declining in this banished land. We don't have any more time to waste. There's no more manpower for us to waste. Everyone frowned and remained silent. Indeed, as Rinpoche had said, this matter wasn't pleasant to hear. Moreover, it felt weird to ask these people to recruit people no matter how one thought about it. However, what Rinpoche said was right. Everyone was a force, and this was a matter for all of humanity. Li Fu snorted and said, I can't do this, and I don't care about other things. I'm only interested in those messy things of yours and want to see if what you said will come true. You don't care about other things, but you won't care if the human race is defeated because of a lack of manpower. Rinpoche asked. Li Fu's face immediately turned black. This accusation was a little too much. Of course, in addition to this point, there's a second point, which is to do missions, Rinpoche continued. The organization will regularly issue missions, and urgent missions may be enforced. This is everyone's responsibility and obligation. What I can say is that every mission is for the sake of our final goal. Naturally, you can also get some points by completing the mission. As for the third point, you can also get points by donating resources to the organization. After all, such a large organization involves all the experts of the human race. We can't possibly make everyone pay out of their own pockets, right? Rinpoche smiled rather kindly. This supplement was a big scam. In terms of donating resources to earn points, there was probably no one better than him and the entire Dao court. Finally, let's talk about the use of points. In addition to the chief and deputy chief, there are also various levels of executors and other missions. At the same time, ordinary members are also divided into different levels, ranging from level 1 to level 9. The higher the level, the greater the contribution to the organization and the human race. After Rinpoche said this, everyone frowned even more. They felt as if they were tied up by an iron chain. They wanted to refute, but what Rinpoche said was indeed reasonable. How can you guarantee that this organization won't become a private tool in the end? Gluttonous Duke looked up with a bitter expression as if he had eaten a yellow lotus. This will require a panel of judges. The executors are divided into 5 levels, with the lowest being level 1 and the highest being level 5. All executors above level 3 will become a member of the council. Every 5 years, the council will review the situation of the past 5 years and make suggestions for future development. In addition, this council has the right to dismiss the chief and deputy chief. If the chief can't lead the organization and the human race to the future that we expect, everyone can choose a capable chief. What I'm doing is only for the human race. As for the rest, I don't even care about Great Xia. If I want to swallow Great Xia, it will be almost effortless, but so what? Only the human race as a whole is my goal. Rinpoche's words at this time, coupled with the previous proposal of the council, were particularly convincing, and everyone nodded slightly. After listening to Rinpoche, everyone fell into deep thought. There were too many things that Rinpoche said that they hadn't thought of before. These people weren't stupid, and they were heroes after all. However, no matter what, they were limited by what they could see. To put it bluntly, they relied on their martial strength to occupy the mountains during the feudal era. At most, they were the leaders of a sect, in charge of thousands of people, and used the management methods that had been passed down. How could they beat Rinpoche in these things? There were many traps in the content, and no matter how they thought about it, they couldn't avoid it. The most important thing was that Rinpoche could obtain resources and materials to increase the proportion of aboriginals among the executors. Dayo was the entire country and sat on the 60,000 mountains. Not to mention, Rinpoche had a lot of technology that could improve productivity. These advantages were incomparable to anyone else. If they wanted to increase the number of people in the executors, they had to complete enough tasks and rope in enough experts. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about the executors not working hard. But so what? Needless to say, Rinpoche had left many traps in the structure of this organization. Even if they found out, they couldn't do anything about it. Although it was a trap, it was an overt plot. If they weren't convinced, they could compete to obtain materials. Chapter 9:15. After 7 days of discussion, they finally came up with a more detailed plan. Everyone was very satisfied. Ma Hongyu and Su Gongso were very satisfied. They felt that they had fought for the greatest benefits for the practitioners of Great Xia. Blood Sea Demon was also very satisfied. With such an organization, he wouldn't be ganged up on next time. He wondered if he could go and gang up on others. Lin Yu was also very satisfied. The food was good, and she slept soundly. Most importantly, she also discovered a magical product from another world, melon seeds. These days, in the hall where everyone was discussing, there was an upgraded version of the melon seed eating crowd, the melon seed eating crowd. Every day, she would hold a bag of melon seeds with a smile on her face. She would finish it at night, and the next day, she would bring another bag. Rinpoche was even more satisfied and smiled every day when he returned to the palace. The only ones who weren't satisfied were probably the Aboriginal officials. They always felt that the other party had taken advantage of them. The first leader was the Empress, and the deputy leaders were Li Fu and Lin Dong. The latter was more unexpected. In fact, he was the most convincing. However, Rinpoche was very optimistic about him. At least, he was the only one among them who had many years of experience in organizing and managing a cult. Ahem, it was his experience in organization management. He had a unique method of brainwashing. At least in Renbachian's opinion, he was much more useful than Li Fu. As for Li Fu, he was more useful as a signboard. However, with the 3rd, 4th, 6th, 9th, and 10th experts in the world in this organization, Li Fu's signboard wasn't so important anymore. At most, it could only be regarded as icing on the cake. In fact, in Renbachian's heart, Li Fu had another use. To block the sword. If Su Wuming really came, it would be a waste if Li Fu, the world's #1 expert and the deputy leader of a charity organization, wasn't used to block the sword. Although Renbachian was confident that he could take down Su Wuming, he had to block the sword first. Otherwise, if Su Wuming attacked him without saying a word, he would die first. In addition, Great Xia was divided into 15 regions, which were under the responsibility of 15 level 1 attendants. They were mainly responsible for recruiting people. If they recruited enough experts, they could be promoted to level 2 or even level 3 attendants. On the surface, Dayo was also divided into 15 regions, which were under the responsibility of some Aboriginal experts and Qingyun swords Wuqing. However, everyone knew the situation in Dayo. Just like that, an organization was established in Dayo with all the human experts as its goal. Other than the crowd and the higher-ups of the Aboriginals, even the commoners of Lon City didn't know that such a thing had happened quietly. They also didn't know what kind of impact it would have on the future. However, the organization had just been established, and apart from many experts, there was no one else. The rest would be up to the others to pull people. Before that, everyone had another thing to do, which was to go to the 60,000 mountains to investigate the situation of the foreign races and see if it was as Renbachian had said. It just so happened that Qi Ziding had recently discovered some traces of foreign tribes in the depths of the 60,000 mountains and was mobilizing experts. These people were all top-notch experts, so they would be able to get there in less time. They estimated that they would be able to get there in 5 months. In this era, everything was slow. It would take 5 months to get there. A piece of news would stay on the road for months. Thus, Qi Ziding was patient enough to wait for everyone to arrive. Except for 3 people, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, and Blood River Ghost. She was going to deal with Su Xianxian. Lin Yu felt that she could eat and drink well in Lon City and leave the troublesome matters to others. Renbachian felt that she and Lin Chala definitely had a lot in common. Blood River Ghost. Renbachian already knew a lot of things, so he wasn't interested. However, looking at Blood River Ghost's anxious look, Renbachian felt that Blood River Ghost was in a hurry to go back and pull people. After all, he had been beaten up by a group of people for half his life and finally saw a glimmer of hope. Do you see it? Just press this to connect to the public channel and ask about the other party situation. At the same time, you can also report the situation through this. Around a table was a circle of experts of all kinds. With this thing, we can communicate with people thousands of kilometers away. Everyone was quite surprised as they didn't expect Dayo to have such a magical item. As Renbachian adjusted the frequency to the public channel, he soon heard a voice say, "To be honest, I really miss Lon City. I don't know if that little brat has stolen my jar of good wine. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Bring your kid over, beat him up, and then send him to me. He's already 20 years old and still fooling around in Lon City. When I was that age, I already had countless people under me. Forget it, I'm still waiting to hold my grandson. I heard that he's quite close to that girl from the Hong family." "Shiwanya, what did you say?" Another dull and stern voice interrupted. "General-in-Chief who supports the nation, speaking of which, you picked up a generation out of nowhere. That's your granddaughter, and that's my son. Go ahead and snicker." Shiwanya wasn't afraid of Hongwu at all. "Get lost. Don't let me see you next time. You guys are the most comfortable. I've been catching rats here every day, and my patience is running out. If Xiao Prince Consort hadn't requested Her Majesty to issue an edict, I would have killed until blood flowed like a river. Let's see if those rats could still hide then. Kill, kill, kill. You only know how to kill. What else do you know besides killing? How old are you? Don't you have any brains? Shui you, I'll kill you. The cold voice immediately said angrily. What did you say just now? You're so old, yet you don't have any brains. Kill, 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 kill. You're more like an idiot. Renbaqian had a strange look on his face. Hong Wu, the protector of the north, Zi Donglai, the protector of the northeast, Shi Wanya, the protector of the south, Li Qianqiu, the protector of the central, Zhui Yu, and his own brother-in-law. Was this a voice chat room? There's actually a voice. Gluttonous Duke muttered to himself. The others had complicated expressions on their faces. There were 3 names that came out of the box just now: Shi Wanya, General-in-Chief who supports the nation, and Zhui Yu. Anyone with a little understanding of Dayo would know what these 3 names represented. These 3 people were in different locations, and no one expected them to be able to communicate directly through this little thing in front of them. Not to mention the few people who were talking to them. Although they didn't say their names, everyone could guess who they were. The 5 protectorates could actually use this little thing to communicate in time. This thing was really convenient and useful. It was no wonder that Dayo had very few defeats on the battlefield in the past few years, whether it was against Great Xia or the invasion of the Yun nation. The coordination of the multiple armies was also perfect. When people looked back and studied the situation, they were surprised that they could actually communicate in time. Ahem, are you guys free today? Has brother-in-law eaten yet? Have you all eaten yet? Oh, it's Xiao Prince Consort. Shi Wanya laughed. How has Xiao Prince Consort been? Li Qianqiu also laughed. Xiao Prince Consort, you have arrived. It's a pity that I haven't been able to meet you. When I return to Lan City to report on my work, I will definitely have a good chat with you. Zhui Yu's rather tactful voice came from the radio. Renbaqian immediately imagined a fatty with a shiny face. Humph. This was Hong Wu. Humph. This was Zi Donglai. Although these 2 people had different reasons, they both had some opinions about Renbaqian. Kid, if you dare to mistreat my sister, I will chop you up and feed you to the bugs. Qi Ziding warned from afar. Ha, brother-in-law, how many times have you said that? Renbaqian laughed. How is that possible? The next second, Qi Ziding's words made Renbaqian's smile freeze. Why did I hear that you have been flirting with that little girl called Li Yuanzhu recently? Renbaqian's eyes widened. Even without looking back, he could feel the strange expressions of the people around him. He didn't want to look back at Li Yuanzhu's expression. However, he wasn't in the mood to think about the expressions of the others. He was flustered and exasperated. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. When did I ever flirt with that little girl Li Yuanzhu? Which bastard is spreading rumors about me? Let him explain to me. Otherwise, I will send him off to reunite with his family. The people around Renbaqian immediately distanced themselves by 5 meters. They looked at Li Yuanzhu and then at Renbaqian with subtle expressions. Chapter 9:16. She looked at his back with an uncertain expression on her face. When did I ever flirt with this guy? Also, what do you mean by little girl? For so many years, there were people who called her a Daoist master, and there were also people who called her a fairy. However, this was the first time she heard someone call her a little girl. Moreover, it was someone who called her that in front of her. Was that Qi Zixiao's brother? That butcher from back then? He was thousands of miles away and didn't know he was here, but Xiao Prince Consort, she gently gritted her teeth and heaved a sigh of relief. Her face returned to its original tranquil state. Ren Baqian stomped his feet in anger for a long time. He vowed that he would go and raid Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan's houses tomorrow. In any case, other than the two of them, there shouldn't be anyone else. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he turned to look at Li Yuanzhu and cupped his fists. I'm sorry, spiritual master. I spoke without thinking. It's nothing. Xiao Prince Consort, you don't have to worry too much about it. This kind of experience is also quite special. Ren Baqian laughed and apologized again before saying, Brother-in-law and Protector General Shi, there will be a group of experts heading to the 60,000 mountains this time. If you find traces of the alien races, don't alert them. This is a very important matter. I estimate that they will arrive in 5 months. Who is it? Qi Ziding asked. You must have heard that in order to fight against the foreign races, Her Majesty has taken the lead and established an organization. These experts are the deacons of the organization. You should have heard of many of their names, like Ma Hongyu, Su Gongso, Lin Dong, Gao Yi, Gluttonous Shi Hao. Ren Baqian listed more than a dozen names in a row. Humph. These guys. Qi Ziding snorted from afar. If it was back then, forget it, a hero doesn't boast about his past achievements. Ren Baqian interrupted Qi Ziding's plan to reminisce about the glorious past and said, in any case, these experts are working hard for the human race, so I have to say hello to you first. Alright, I got it, Qi Ziding, who had been interrupted, said resentfully. I won't look for trouble with them. The corners of Su Gongso's mouth twitched. If it was the Qi Ziding of the past, he would still have some confidence in his words. However, ever since his leg was broken, Qi Ziding's strength had decreased greatly. Who could he find trouble with? Furthermore, everyone didn't have a good impression of Qi Ziding. Back then, his reputation was notorious outside of Dayou, and many practitioners from the Yun nation had died at his hands. If it was another occasion, it was hard to say who would find trouble with who. Did he really think that they were the same as the martial artists of the Yun nation who had died in his hands? But for Qi Zixiao's sake, it wasn't good to be calculative with him now. However, it would be a different story if he came looking for trouble. He then spent some time teaching these experts how to use the radio station and how to charge it. For those who had never come into contact with this kind of technology, it still took some time. It took a full hour for everyone to master it. During this period, although no one said anything, they were amazed in their hearts. He had seen too many new things in Dayou this time. Whether it was the radio station, the streetlights, or the water tower that was being installed in Lon City, water was pumped through electric pumps to dozens of water towers that were built in Lon City and then flowed through pipes to each household. Although only Beihong district had been completed, it was said that this water supply equipment was provided to all the people in Lon City. In addition, the ox carts in Lon City also caught their attention. This was because the frames of the carriages in Lon City weren't as bumpy as horse carriages. After understanding them, they found out that the tires of these carriages were wrapped in a layer of rubber, and the interior of the carriages was said to use something called cushioning. Not to mention the potatoes, sweet potatoes, and jack-o'-lanterns all over the streets. Even the poor people could eat their fill. These experiences refreshed these experts' understanding of Dayou. Based on the current situation, Dayou might be able to catch up with Great Xia in some aspects in a decade. These changes were all brought about by Xiao Prince Consort. Given the strength of Qi Zixiao and the aboriginals, coupled with the strange things that Xiao Prince Consort had, it had to be said that Qi Zixiao's foresight wasn't bad. Ren Baqian wondered where she found such a person. When are those people leaving? The Empress asked casually during dinner. In the past, the Empress rarely spoke when she ate. Perhaps she had been infected by Renbochin, but she had developed the habit of chatting while eating. "Do you dislike them, Your Majesty?" Renbochin asked with a smile. "Yes," the Empress said bluntly. "However, I know how to deal with them. In fact, although both sides have been hostile for so many years, these feelings will ease with more interaction in the future. We'll talk about it when the time comes," the Empress said after drinking a glass of wine. Renbochin looked at the wine glass in the Empress's hand, rolled his eyes, and said, "I met Minister Tong and Minister Qin today, and they said that drinking alcohol isn't good for the fetus." "Both of them?" The Empress looked at Renbochin suspiciously. "Your Majesty is pregnant with the future Empress of Dayo, so they will definitely be concerned." Renbochin laughed. "I will talk to them tomorrow." The Empress narrowed her eyes, and a cold glint flashed in them. "In any case, I believe in Your Majesty. Your Majesty's understanding of your own body isn't something that outsiders can speculate about. They shouldn't have speculated about Your Majesty's private affairs." Renbochin chuckled. "Humph." The cold glint in the Empress's eyes intensified. When she looked up at Renbochin, the coldness in her eyes eased. "Of course, I know my own body." Renbochin looked at the row of calcium milk beside him. Recently, the Empress had reduced her alcohol tolerance from 2 bottles a day to 1 bottle. He was quite satisfied with this result. The next day, many experts set off with 2 radio stations. A group of winged cavalry warriors accompanied them to avoid any trouble along the way. When Renbochin returned to the palace, he saw Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan coming out with bruised noses and swollen faces. When they saw Renbochin, they didn't know what to say. "Ministers, what's going on?" Renbochin asked with a friendly smile. "I don't know who told Her Majesty that I was speculating about Your Majesty's private affairs. Could it be Zhao Prince Consort?" Tong Jingye asked with an unfriendly expression. "What private affairs were the 2 of you discussing?" "Discussing Her Majesty is also discussing me." "Let me hear it." Renbochin brushed it off completely. "Humph." Tong Jingye snorted. "Could it be that the 2 of you revealed each other's secrets?" Renbochin asked casually. Tong Jingye immediately became vigilant and asked, "What do you mean, Zhao Prince Consort?" "Nothing, just a casual guess." "Or did one of you accidentally say something that Her Majesty found out about? However, I'm really curious, what exactly were the 2 of you discussing in private?" Tong Jingye ignored Renbochin's question and snorted, "If Zhao Prince Consort wants to sow discord between the 2 of us, then forget it." Renbochin laughed in his heart. Of course, there was no need to sow discord between the 2 of them. Sure enough, Qin Chuan immediately turned hostile and said, "What relationship do I have with you? On the other hand, my saber wants to build a relationship with you. Why don't the 2 of you get closer?" Tong Jingye's face turned black as he turned around and scolded, "If it weren't for your brainless actions, would I have been punished by Her Majesty? You are obviously the one who has been doing shameful things all day long. I am the one who has been implicated." Qin Chuan didn't back down. Seeing that the 2 of them were quarreling again, Renbochin leaned against the palace gate, took out a bag of melon seeds, and watched the show. In less than a minute, the 2 of them switched from quarreling to fighting. Qin Chuan used his ultimate technique, the 9 chains, while Tong Jingye retaliated with the 13 chains. For a moment, the square in front of the palace was filled with the 2 of them. Renbochin was helping them count how many floor tiles they had broken. He still had to send the bill to their houses later. Whose corpse was it that was shaken out of the ground by Qin Chuan's kick? Chapter 9:17. After sending off the experts, Renbochin stood on the city wall and watched them disappear into the horizon. He could finally relax. At least such a major task had been completed smoothly. As they descended the city wall, Lin Yu, who had been deep in thought, suddenly made a fuss. "Aya, that box of yours can actually talk." The corner of Renbochin's mouth twitched. He turned to look at Lin Yu and really wanted to knock her on the head. However, she was an old monster who had been famous for more than 20 years. Even though she wasn't very smart, he still had to maintain the necessary respect. "It would be good if you were an aboriginal," Renbochin said after some thought. "Oh." Lin Yu looked at Renbochin and continued to look thoughtful. Renbochin estimated that she would have to wait until tomorrow before asking him why she was an aboriginal. "If you were an aboriginal, it wouldn't look so out of place," Renbochin muttered to himself. Aboriginals. It was normal for them to have muscles in their brains, but it was also normal for them to be brainless. Although Lin Yu was considered outstanding among the aboriginals, it was still passable. "Oh." Lin Yu continued to look thoughtful. Renbochin ignored her and sighed. How did such a pretty girl have such a brain? He had privately inquired about Xiao Linyue, and it was said that she was quite normal back then. At least not to this extent. Otherwise, it would be impossible for no one to know about her. In the following days, Li Yuanzhu and Blood Sea Demon returned to Great Xia. Renbochin was busy with various matters in Lan City, including the entire old city renovation plan and the preparation of the new city. The renovation plan included the water supply tower and pipelines that were being built to deliver tap water to every household. In fact, this was a very dangerous move. If someone poisoned the water supply tower, in this world where the top experts could form an army, it wasn't impossible. Therefore, the security of the water supply tower was essential. In addition, there was the planning of public toilets and the laying of sewers. For a city that had been built for hundreds of years, it involved a lot of work. Although there were still signs of urinating in Lan City, it was much better than when Renbochin first arrived. It had to be said that sometimes, severe punishment was a powerful way to improve the quality of the people. There was a public toilet every 200 meters, and the soldiers outside the city explained some rules to the aboriginals. As for delivering electric lights to every household, that could only be a wish for the next few years. Coal and rubber were transported from the south, and Dayo's current transportation situation was barely able to meet some of Renbochin's urgent requirements. Needless to say, it was inappropriate to use it for something like this. From time to time, Renbochin would see Lin Yu carrying all kinds of things on the street. Renbochin was puzzled. Why wasn't Lin Yu leaving yet? However, when he thought of this lady's intelligence, he let her be. At night, Renbochin and the Empress lay on the bed, and Renbochin plunged into that world in his mind. During this period of time, 2 more planets had formed in the world in his mind. As for the dust produced after the other explosions, it did not meet the conditions to form planets. Now, a few nebulae had formed in that space. Somewhere on one of the planets that was half blue and half green, a huge city stood there. The Empress's palace was located in the center of the city. It was originally located on a hill, but this hill was filled with soil and raised by dozens of meters. The palace gate was at the bottom of the hill. After entering the palace gate, there was a straight road. There were 2 shuttle buses that would take the court officials to the palace on the hill. As for the palace complex, Renbochin combined the palaces in this world with the Forbidden City in his previous life. Every palace was much more magnificent than the original. In addition, the largest area was occupied by all kinds of gardens, which took up more than half of the palace. To Renbochin, the magnificent palace complex was far less interesting than the gardens and greenery. People who grew up in a city built with steel and concrete probably had this kind of preference. In all 4 directions of the palace, there were plazas that were 200 meters deep. This allowed the imperial guards to stand on top of the city wall and observe the situation in the distance at any time. This also isolated the palace from the city. Outside the plaza was the so-called Second Ring, which included the residences of many officials and the magistrate offices of most departments. This was the center of Lawn City. Further out, the Third Ring was the residential area for low-ranking officials and the rich. At the same time, there were two commercial areas, which were mainly used for large-scale and high-end transactions. The Fourth Ring was the residential area for ordinary people. In the entire city, buildings with more than 6 stories were not allowed within the Second Ring. The deeper one went, the lower the building would be. Although the buildings outside the Second Ring were all 6 stories, Renbochin believed that with time, this city would also become a city full of steel and concrete. The two-way 8-lane concrete roads, 5-meter-wide sidewalks, sewer pipes, power supply facilities, subway lines, commercial areas, parks, and landscapes were almost all designed according to modern city standards. After all, Renbochin had experience in modern society and knew what level a city would reach. Renbochin's divine sense floated above the city and checked the results he had achieved during this period to see if there were any omissions. He had to admit that the world in his mind was really advantageous in this aspect. He could realize his ideas according to his thoughts and directly see the results. This greatly reduced the cost of trial and error. Renbochin planned this city based on the population of 3 million. In a short period of time, the city might be very empty. However, in a decade or so, Renbochin believed that this city would be filled up and expand to the periphery. Until the population reached 10 million, it would become the only super city in this world. As for the problems that limited the size of cities in this era, productivity and transportation, it wasn't a big problem in Renbochin's eyes. Renbochin felt a little tired after withdrawing from his sea of knowledge. He turned his head to look at the Empress and found that her eyes were still open. It was actually quite scary to look up at the sky in the middle of the night instead of sleeping. However, the Empress had very little need for sleep. 2 hours at a time or a good night's sleep was enough for her. However, what was the meaning of her beaming with joy in the middle of the night? "Your Majesty, what are you thinking about?" Renbochin turned over and hugged the Empress while his hand wandered around her body. "The ball in my stomach is talking to me." The Empress looked a little excited. If Renbochin hadn't entered her sea of knowledge just now, she would have already shared it with him. However, Renbochin wasn't excited at all when he heard this. Instead, he felt extremely horrified. The Empress had only been pregnant for 7 months. Did Nija in her stomach become a spirit? What did he say? Renbochin suppressed the panic in his heart and asked in a slow tone. He said, "He wants to drink." The Empress sat up from the bed. Renbochin's face twitched and asked, "Is he the one who wants to drink or are you the one who wants to drink?" "Both." "He really told me." The Empress turned to Renbochin and said seriously. Chapter 9:18. She had just returned from Renwanyan's wedding. Renbochin had been married for 2 years, in the eyes of his parents, but there was still no news about his grandson. Fortunately, there was someone to share the burden. Renwanyan married a third-year student after they met for a year. The other party's family conditions weren't bad, and they were considered small assets in the country. They were indeed small, with tens of millions of yuan. In the eyes of ordinary people in third-tier cities, they were considered wealthy, but in first-tier cities, they only had 2 or 3 houses. Renbochin glanced at her. She wasn't considered beautiful, but she had a good personality. She was gentle and had the grace of a Jiangnan woman. In fact, she was a long-legged girl from the northeast. Overall, Renbochin had a good impression of her. The wedding was also held in his hometown. After the ceremony, Renbochin returned directly to Wuji City. No matter what, he could finally heave a sigh of relief now that the firepower had been diverted. At present, the Empress was already 8 months pregnant, but her belly still hadn't bulged. This made Renbochin wonder if her belly was the same as Doraemon's pocket. No matter how much wine, meat, calcium milk, or how many children she had, the latter didn't count. However, the Empress's condition made Renbochin doubt whether she could give birth according to the due date. Therefore, after some hesitation, he didn't tell his parents that he was about to have a grandson or granddaughter. "Your Highness, I'm going to film a movie. A production team has invited me." Renbochin opened his mouth and turned to look at Ning Kaichin, who was drinking coffee. At this time, she was wearing a plain dress, had shoulder-length hair, light makeup, lipstick, and dyed her nails. Compared to her seductive appearance in the past, this outfit was especially attractive. It wasn't impossible for someone to poach her to film a movie with her image. Will it affect the mission? After all, it's too easy for my whereabouts to be exposed after becoming a public figure. Renbochin frowned. He hadn't cared much about the film and television industry. However, Ning Kaichin had an extraordinary interest in putting herself in front of everyone and letting them see her beauty. "Do you want me to put on some makeup for you? Which female celebrity do you want to see? My figure is much better than theirs. However, my face can be more or less done." Ning Kaichin was in high spirits and wanted to show Renbochin her skills. "Han Hong," Renbochin said after some thought. Ning Kaichin's expression froze, and he said gloomily, "You're making things difficult for me." Renbochin laughed. Ning Kaichin was getting more and more interesting. "Don't worry, it won't delay anything," Ning Kaichin said. Renbochin thought about it and decided not to interfere too much. She could do whatever she wanted to do. "I heard that the circle is very messy. Just be careful. You have probably forgotten that I am also a sword immortal." Ning Kaichin smiled sweetly in the blink of an eye. "I've never seen a sword immortal with a flying sword that is always sneaky and afraid of heights." Renbochin mercilessly exposed her. Sure enough, Ning Kaichin's face fell again, and she said resentfully, "Who is to blame?" Renbochin thought about it and decided to end this topic. The two of them sat for a while longer before someone came in. It was Ding Jia. Ding Jia, who was now 30 years old, looked rather mature. She gave him a big hug and said, "Boss, you are still so young." He then turned to Ning Kaichin and said enthusiastically, "You are still so beautiful." Although Ding Jia knew that Ning Kaichin was originally a man, Renbochin still felt that he had some intention of knowing that she was a man. It had to be said that Ding Jia was a true warrior and was much braver than most people. However, when it came to age, Renbochin did some mental calculations and realized that he wasn't much older than Ding Jia. The little boy from back then was now independent. After careful calculation, Renbochin cursed in his heart. It seemed that he wasn't as old as Renwanyan. Back then, Renwanyan was 6 years younger than him. Now that 14 years had passed on Earth, from 2017 to 2031, he had aged 7 years while Renwanyan had aged 14 years. Renwanyan was 1 year older than him. Would there be a situation where Renwanyan's son was older than him in the future? Would there be a situation where his grandson was older than him? He couldn't think about this as it would be extremely scary. "Boss, what are you thinking about? Your expression is so weird. Do you want to try this? It's a good product." Ding Jia opened the cigar box and took out an Amondo-sized cigar. He then took out a lighter and lit it up before handing it to Renbochin. "Let's get down to business." Renbochin took a puff. He would occasionally touch this thing. Cigars were mainly for tasting and not inhaling like smoking. For many people, it was an enjoyment, but for Renbochin, it was a snack. Ding Jia took out an electronic device and placed it on the table. Then, he sprayed out a thick mist, and a three-dimensional image began to appear in the mist. Ding Jia fiddled with it a few times, and a series of photos appeared on the screen. In the photos were men and women with tall eyebrows and deep eyes. Most of them were in their 40s or 50s. Renbachyan didn't focus on the country. They're all here. Over the years, they haven't received much attention, but they're pretty good researchers. There are a total of 237 people. Among them, 87 are in physics, 42 are in chemistry, and some are in mathematics, biology, medicine, and flora. Their addresses, hobbies, and detailed information are all here. I have also arranged the immigration routes. Recently, there have been a lot of people smuggling into the country, and the checks are very strict. We have to pay attention to this. Oh. Are there a lot of people smuggling into the country? Renbachyan was slightly surprised. Boss doesn't pay too much attention to these things. Ding Jia wasn't surprised at all. He knew that this boss had a lot of secrets and that he was always isolated from society and knew very little about the changes in society. In the past 2 years, there have been more and more people immigrating into the country. In addition to our old brothers, there are also many immigrants from the Western Alliance and the United States. Although some martial arts can be obtained from abroad, they are all ordinary martial arts. As for martial arts that require a certain status, such as those in the military, the police, and the Armed Forces Command, the number of martial arts that can be obtained is decreasing, Ding Jia explained to Renbachyan. Renbachyan nodded his head after hearing this. It was reasonable for these things to happen. There were a total of 8 supercomputers that analyzed martial arts, and it was said that the number of martial arts manuals had already exceeded 4 digits. Although many of them had some flaws, there were also many that were more advanced than ordinary martial arts. Some of these martial arts were already much better than the original ones. Moreover, martial arts depended on the person. Some people made slow progress when practicing one type of martial arts, but would make rapid progress when practicing another type of martial arts. Therefore, the more martial arts one mastered, the more attractive it was to talented people. The military and the Armed Forces Command were obviously the best of the best. He turned to Ning Kaichin and said, "His people will cooperate with you. The names on the list are the targets, and the information is in there. You can arrange the order yourself. I promise to complete the mission." Ding Jia gave a military salute. "Thank you." Ning Kaichin smiled at Ding Jia. "What are you saying? It's an honor." Ding Jia smiled mischievously. Renbachyan shook his head and ignored the trivial matters between the two of them. Since they were both willing, he would let them be. "Be careful. You have appeared beside me many times, and your identity has probably been registered in some units." Ning Kaichin pursed her lips and smiled. Her fingers moved slightly, and a long sword broke through the window. It danced in the air with her fingers and emitted a cold light. Chapter 9:19. Ding Tong, what did you fill in? An 18 or 19-year-old girl asked another girl. Although I want to continue learning, I don't want to touch algebraic geometry anymore. I'm preparing to enter the Ministry of Works, Ding Tong replied. That's a pity, the other girl said regretfully. Sure you want to continue learning. I'm so envious of you. You're smarter than me. Yagui values you a lot. Ding Tong said enviously. Yagui values everyone very much. Sure you expressed his feelings. It's good to enter the Ministry of Works as a rank 8 official. However, the opportunity to learn is even more difficult, especially since we are the first batch. We will definitely be put in an important position in the future. I know, but I really don't want to touch those formulas and diagrams. My chest hurts when I see them. Ding Tong looked helpless. She had been working hard for the past few years, but her results were still below average. Although they only needed to test one's abilities and wouldn't eliminate anyone, she really didn't want to torture herself anymore. Forget it, it's not bad. It wasn't so easy to enter the Ministry of Works in the past. Furthermore, I'm already satisfied with being a rank 8 official. I'm already satisfied enough and can continue learning in the Ministry of Works. Ding Tong felt relieved. In fact, for these commoner children, this was exactly what they wanted. After filling in their application forms, a portion of the students would enter the various ministries to train as low-level officials, while the rest would continue to learn more advanced content. In fact, this caused a sensation among the commoners. Although there were rumors, they were still rumors, and it still caused quite a stir when it actually happened. One had to know that one didn't need to be talented in martial arts to be able to become an official after a few years in high school. This was simply like a cow falling from the sky. Although these students were struggling and vexed, others were scratching their heads in envy. He estimated that after this batch of students graduated, there would be a large number of commoners who would want to send their children to the academy. The next batch of students would need to be recruited again, and it seemed like the academy would need to expand. Currently, 37 out of the 49 students had submitted their future applications. Most of them were the children of officials, and almost all of them had chosen to continue learning. Even if they didn't want to learn, their families wouldn't allow them. For example, Du Lao Lu wanted to go back and hug his wife. In the end, he was beaten black and blue by his father, and his leg was almost broken. That big treasure made all the Aboriginal officials in Lawn City understand one thing: science was power. Although they did not know what science was, they knew what power was. Explosion was power. If these disciples of clans who weren't talented in martial arts were to give up on this path, would they really vanish into the crowd? As for the commoners, half of them were studying and the other half were reporting to the Ministry of Works. In fact, the Ministry of Revenue was also very envious of this batch of students. Other departments also needed them, but because the number of students was too small, Rinpoche still assigned them to the Ministry of Works. After all, the Ministry of Works currently lacked manpower the most. This matter had nothing to do with Tong Jinya inviting him to the brothel for 3 consecutive days. A few days later, the results were finally out. 8 students went to the Ministry of Works, while the remaining 41 students stayed behind to continue their studies. Rinpoche was quite satisfied with this result. He had spent the most effort on this batch of students. He really didn't want to see them become ordinary officials of the Ministry of Works. Although it seemed like their future was pretty good. As more and more students graduated and more knowledgeable students graduated, they would gradually vanish into the crowd. If they went to the Ministry of Works and gave up on continuing their studies, becoming a rank 6 or 7 official would probably be their limit. Time passed very quickly. After another half a month, it was time for this batch of students to leave the academy. The night before that, Rinpoche specially organized a bonfire party at the academy to send them off. Before the party, Rinpoche first gave a speech, which was the so-called graduation ceremony. Looking at the people below, Rinpoche was filled with emotion. In a few years, he watched these people grow from 16 or 17 years old to about 20 years old. He watched them grow from counting with their fingers to doing addition and subtraction, to 4, 9, and 27, all the way to the level of junior high school graduates. It could be said that the changes in these 3.5 years were huge. I won't say much. I only have one thing to say. Whether you stay in the academy to continue your studies or go to the Ministry of Works, in the future, if you have nothing to do, take a look at the books and don't stop moving forward. If one day, I see you bastards in the academy again, I won't shoot next time. Rinpoche stood in front and smiled. Many people below laughed, and a few girls' eyes turned red. After all, they had been classmates for 3.5 years. After today, even though they would still be in Lawn City, it would be completely different. Next, Her Majesty will say a few words to you. What followed was a loud exclamation. Only then did everyone realize that the Empress was actually here. They saw a woman dressed in red walk out of the office and slowly walk to the stage with a faint smile on her face. She was the Empress. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Greetings, Your Majesty." Everyone greeted her one after another. "There's no need for today. I'm here to see you and nothing else. Your principal has already said what should be said. What I want to say is that you are the first batch of students in Dayo, and I will see how far you can go." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Everyone cheered. How great of an honor was it to be noticed by the Empress? Every student was so excited that they almost couldn't hold back and wanted to jump up. Alright, next up is the highlight of the day. Renbochin laughed heartily when he saw the Empress disappear into the darkness after she finished speaking. Behind Renbochin was a white projection screen, which they had seen quite a few times. This was because robots would usually project content on such a screen when they were lecturing. However, today's content was a little different from usual. As Renbochin fiddled with the electronic device, the screen lit up. Suddenly, an extremely cheerful and eccentric background music played, as well as the image of Shirgan riding his motorcycle and crashing into the wall with a stunned look on his face. This was accompanied by the extremely eccentric March of Spinach. Following that, Tong Lan kicked Du Laolu away. Then Du Laolu flew back, and Tong Lan kicked him again. He flew back, and she kicked him again. Everyone immediately burst out laughing. Shiryu put his hands on his waist and walked like a great Xia woman. After 3 steps, he fell to the ground. Ha 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 ha. Many students burst out laughing. They didn't expect Shiryu, who usually didn't speak much, to be like this. Shiryu's face turned red, and he covered his small mouth in surprise. When Su Peng and Xiongping fought, Su Peng stepped on Xiongping's body to show off his prowess. He didn't expect Xiongping to pull down his shorts. Fortunately, he still had underwear inside. Su Peng was one of the few Aboriginal men who wore underwear. The reason was that he couldn't urinate properly. However, this underwear had done a great service at this time. However, the problem was that Renbochin had kindly censored Su Peng's underwear. Everyone watched as Su Peng, whose lower body was censored, stomped his feet in anger. "I still have another layer underneath. I still have another layer underneath." Su Peng shouted from the crowd below, but it was followed by laughter. Tong Lan kicked Shirgan's buttocks and then dodged. As a result, she didn't pay attention and bumped into a thick tree trunk. Tears came out of her eyes. Tong Lan's small face turned red. When did Yagui take this? Shirgan, Shiryu, Su Peng, Du Laolu, Tong Lan, Ding Tong, Tu Mushing, Ping Li, Wang Daxian, along with the Spinach March, every student appeared in the clip. The least was twice, and the most were more than a dozen times. In particular, the scenes of Du Laolu being kicked, Tong Lan crashing into a tree, Shirgan crashing into a wall, and Su Peng's upper body being censored appeared repeatedly. This clip was made up of all the students' dark history. Seeing their own dark history repeatedly appear, everyone's faces turned green. However, seeing that the others didn't run away, some of them felt better. However, those who appeared the most were still full of grief and indignation, and they couldn't wait to rush forward and fight it out with Yagui. It was simply too shameful. This clip was personally done by Renbochin. He had been busy preparing for this matter for the past few days. It could be said that although this group of students was very stupid, they were the most diligent and favorite. Many years later, when these people became successful and famous, if this clip was released, they probably wouldn't be able to clear their names even if they jumped into the Yellow River. Renbochin was ready. When the time came, when Dayo had the internet and the ghost website, he would put this dark history on it. Do you think this is the only time you will be embarrassed? Don't worry, you will be embarrassed for the rest of your lives. How could he not share such a good thing? Along with the cheerful music, many students began to laugh, roast meat, dance, drink and fight, until late at night, soft sobbing sounds could be heard from the academy. Chapter 920. Compared to Dayo, Great Xia had the kind of society that Renbochin imagined. Where there were people, there would be grudges, and where there were grudges, there would be killings. In the society, one had no choice. It was better to forget each other than to help each other in difficult times. All kinds of descriptions of society created a dream in the hearts of every Chinese youth. This was especially true in Great Xia. According to the official records, there were a total of 666 sects that still existed today. The various new sects that weren't recorded by the official records were born and died every day. Other than themselves and their relatives, even their enemies couldn't be remembered. It could be said that every sect that could stand tall had gone through a lot of trials and tribulations. Luohua sect was one of the less famous ones. In fact, Luohua sect was famous for a period of time 1,000 years ago. However, following the fall of the sect's higher-ups in a war, the most important part of their Luohua body technique was lost. Since then, Luohua sect, which was originally a first-rate sect, gradually fell to a third-rate sect. It wasn't until the appearance of Su Xianxian, who made up for the missing Luohua body technique and rose to the top of the list of world experts with his amazing talent. In terms of fighting techniques, Su Xianxian might not even be in the top 50, but his body technique was among the top 3 in the world. If there were people in this world who weren't easy to kill, Su Xianxian could be considered one of them. Such experiences and achievements, coupled with his original temperament, gave Su Xianxian a strong sense of self-esteem and pride. He was like this back in Dayo. Renbochin naturally didn't defend him in any way. He just looked down on him and didn't like him. You're just a gigolo raised by Qi Zixiao. What right do you have to sit with us? What right do you have to regard yourself as the master? Not to mention the letter that tricked dozens of top experts to that remote place. There might have been people who felt the same way as him, but no one was as obvious as him. Or perhaps, he was too impatient. 2 hours later, he traveled 300 kilometers. 2 hours later, he was already 300 kilometers away before he took a break. As for offending Qi Zixiao, he merely sneered at her in his heart. Although Qi Zixiao had once infiltrated deep into Great Xia and killed Hua Sanlu, he was not Hua Sanlu. If he wanted to escape, no one could stop him. On the contrary, he tore off Qi Zixiao's face in front of her and let that despicable person know who he was. This made him extremely happy, and the cultivation that had been stagnant for a long time seemed to have loosened a little, which made him feel even more carefree. This carefree feeling lasted until the next morning, when a mushroom-like cloud rose above the place where he left. Could it be that secret palace? A smile appeared on Su Xianxian's face. I might have to go and take a look. Although he had offended Qi Zixiao yesterday, he just had to be careful. As for the other experts of Dayo, they couldn't even touch the hem of his clothes and felt no pressure at all. This time, he had to conserve some energy on his return trip, so his speed was a little slower. It took him an hour to return to the area he had been at the day before. However, what he saw was completely different from what he had imagined. Secret Palace. In that area, there was only a huge pit, as if a star had fallen from the sky and smashed into it. The edge of the big pit was full of red and black liquid. 5 kilometers away from the big pit, all the way to his front, was scorched black, and the flames in some places had not even extinguished. The air was filled with a burnt smell and a burning sensation, as if one would be ignited if they got closer to the big pit. This is the secret palace of a god. Su Xianxian frowned. Is this the scene when the secret palace of a god opens? Did those people go in? Su Xianxian first investigated the traces of the aboriginals and found no signs of movement. Furthermore, he saw the figures of other experts in the distance. They didn't go in. Are they waiting? Su Xianxian waited in a secret place near the big pit for a whole day, but not only did he not see those experts who wanted to enter the secret palace, they even withdrew with the aboriginals. This gave Su Xianxian a strange feeling. What exactly happened? What happened? After thinking for half a day, Su Xianxian gritted his teeth and went deep into the big pit after the aboriginals left. However, he didn't find any signs of the secret palace, only some bright gems at the edge of the big pit. Su Xianxian suspected that these gems had some kind of relationship with the secret palace of a god. He found a larger one and carried it with him. Then, he stayed nearby for another 5 days, but those people didn't come back. Occasionally, he would find aboriginal winged cavalry warriors patrolling the periphery carefully. Seeing how cautious the winged cavalry was, Su Xianxian suspected that there was a secret. After staying for a few more days and still not finding any news, Su Xianxian had no choice but to leave. The reason for leaving was that something happened to him that made him a little frightened. Hair loss. These few days, strands of his hair were falling off. In just a few days, Su Xianxian's head was already in a terrible state. Under such circumstances, even if Su Xianxian didn't want to give up, he had to leave temporarily to find a solution. He suspected that he had been poisoned, but when he returned to Great Xia and visited many famous doctors, he didn't find any signs of being poisoned. Instead, his hair continued to fall off, leaving only a few strands of hair on his head. This situation almost made Su Xianxian, who had always thought highly of himself, almost go crazy, but he still couldn't find a solution. Even the famous doctors couldn't find the cause of this situation. Until one day, he inexplicably lost a tooth. Even if a spirit will expert died, he wouldn't lose a tooth. How could such a situation happen? He knew that there was a big problem with him. He had been plotted against. Poison warrior. Ren Baqian. How did he know that he would go back? How did he poison him? What a poisonous poison. What a poisonous warrior. He had underestimated him. Feeling a little flustered, Su Xianxian returned to Luohua sect to look for the notes of his ancestors to find a solution. If there was no result, he could only break into Dao's palace. His first reaction was to go back to the sect to check the notes instead of looking for Rinpoche. Even he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it, but it was absolutely impossible for him to do so in the past. He didn't know when he had been poisoned, but he was deeply afraid of Rinpoche. He was even more afraid of him than Qi Zixiao. 3 days after he returned to the sect, an indifferent and otherworldly voice of a woman sounded on the mountain peak where Luohua sect was located. Su Xianxian, come out and meet me. This is. Su Xianxian, who was focusing all his attention on the notes, was awakened. He was angry at first, but then realized the identity of the person who came. It seemed to be someone from the rumors, Li Yuanzhu. Wasn't she with those barbarians? Why was she here? He had to meet this person. Su Xianxian's figure appeared outside with a thought. He looked for the source of the voice and saw an otherworldly woman in a Taoist robe standing in front of him, looking at him with eyes full of surprise. Chapter 921. Su Xianxian's current appearance really surprised Li Yuanzhu. Although Su Xianxian's original appearance could not be considered elegant, it could be regarded as ancient and had the demeanor of a scholar. In particular, he had the temperament of a top expert in the world, and his eyes shone brightly. However, the person in front of her now had only 2 or 3 strands of hair clinging tightly to his scalp. His eyes were swollen, and his cheeks were thin. He was full of unhealthy morbidity. His eyes were dim, and he looked abnormally dispirited. It had only been 2 months since they last met. What had happened to Su Xianxian for him to change so much? Su Xianxian's face immediately darkened when he saw Li Yuanzhu's expression. Nowadays, he hated it when others paid attention to his appearance. However, the other party was the third most powerful expert in the world, and he had something to ask, so it was inconvenient for him to flare up. However, at this time, there were more than 2 people present. More than a dozen disciples of Luohua sect rushed out to check on the situation. They were all very surprised when they saw Su Xianxian's appearance, which made him even more irritated. "Jinrenli, what brings you to Luohua sect today?" Su Xianxian asked while suppressing the irritation in his heart. Li Yuanzhu was silent for a moment before she said, "Forget it. It doesn't matter how you became like this. I'm here to take your life today." Su Xianxian thought he had heard wrong and asked in shock, "Jinrenli, what did you say?" It was important to note that she had never killed a single person since her debut. But the purpose of her coming here was to kill him. Li Yuanzhu sighed and said, "I'm here today to take your life in your head." Su Xianxian's expression changed drastically, and the others looked even more miserable as if they were facing a formidable enemy. She was the third most powerful expert in the world. Many people's hearts were pounding even if they were just going against her. "Jinrenli, what are you talking about? Is there any conflict between Luohua sect and you? Or is there some misunderstanding?" a middle-aged man suddenly shouted. Everyone hoped that it was just a misunderstanding. "There is no conflict or misunderstanding. I just have to do this. Sorry for offending you." Li Yuanzhu was not in a hurry to make a move. If Su Xianxian didn't die, everyone in Luohua sect would die. However, Li Yuanzhu couldn't be bothered to give such a reason. Such things might happen again in the future. Regardless of whether the other party hated her or not, she would let them be. Su Xianxian chuckled and said, "Li Yuanzhu, we have no enmity in the past. Do you want my life because of the secret residence's treasure? I've already left the secret palace. What kind of secret is it? Even after I've left, you still want to kill me." Luohua sect's secret residence. What kind of secret residence is that even after I left? Everyone from Luohua sect was surprised. Hidden treasures in the secret palace. You want to take my life, so you and I are enemies. You guys are so ruthless. That Rinpochen poisoned me to this extent, and you, Li Yuanzhu, who has never killed anyone, wanted to take my life with your own hands. Aisha Su Qiu said. You is, you, I, you, I, you, and you, and you, I, you. Su, she is Su, of him. Of. Su. Of. Li. However, he was slightly surprised. Was Su Xianxian poisoned by Rinpochen? When? There were so many top experts present, but none of them had discovered him. Furthermore, he was able to cause an expert like Su Xianxian to end up in such a miserable state. His reputation as the poison warrior was well-deserved. Sure enough, he couldn't be underestimated just because he was an earth will expert. Looks like I'm dead for sure. Su Xianxian laughed in a low voice, but this laughter was a little sad. If it was before, he would still dare to fight. But now, not only did he lose more than half of his hair, there were also some problems with his body. One of the problems was that he had lost a tooth, and it was also something that caught his attention. In addition, the aura in his body was not flowing smoothly. His movement technique, which was originally smooth, was now slightly obstructed. It wouldn't affect him if he was facing an ordinary expert, but he didn't even have the strength to fight back against Li Yuanzhu, who was stronger than him. Su Xianxian laughed bitterly, took out a jade pendant from his bosom, and threw it into someone's hand. Su Dazhong, from now on, you will be the sect master of Luohua sect. Sect leader. The middle-aged man who received the jade pendant was shocked. You have learned more than half of the Luohua movement technique, and the rest is on the jade pendant. You can choose one of your disciples to pass it on to. Don't let Luohua sect fall into a situation where the inheritance is interrupted again. Li Yuanzhu stood there silently, waiting for Su Xianxian to give instructions for his funeral. After Su Xianxian finished speaking, he looked at Li Yuanzhu and said, I have to thank you for allowing me to pass on the sect's inheritance. However, if you want to take my head, it will depend on whether you can do it or not. After speaking, Su Xianxian tapped his feet, and his entire body turned into dozens of figures that shot in all directions. Li Yuanzhu's eyes flashed, and she chased in one direction. If there was no obstruction when Su Xianxian's figure moved, she might not have been able to find his real body so quickly. She was also sure that there was indeed something wrong with his body, and it wasn't a small problem. Sect leader. When the people of Luohua sect saw the two figures disappear into the door, they immediately cried out in sorrow. Li Yuanzhu. More than one person called out this name, and endless grief and indignation rose in their hearts. However, no one knew that Li Yuanzhu had saved everyone in Luohua sect, except for Su Xianxian. Li Yuanzhu didn't want to explain and didn't care about the follow-up. She just followed Su Xianxian from afar. At the same time, she was a little shocked. Su Xianxian was indeed worthy of being the sect leader of Luohua sect. Li Yuanzhu barely managed to keep up with him, and this was under the circumstances that there was something wrong with his body. If Su Xianxian was in his best condition, she might not be able to keep up. The two of them chased and fled for more than half a month. Every time they passed a town, Su Xianxian would release his aura from afar and shout, Li Yuanzhu, you became a barbarian lackey for the sake of the hidden treasures in the secret residence and killed the experts of Great Xia. How can you be the third strongest person in the world? You're simply a disgrace to being a son. His voice was like a gust of wind. The people in the town couldn't even see his figure, but they could feel his aura, which immediately caused waves of commotion. After more than half a month, the entire eastern part of Great Xia was in an uproar. Li Yuanzhu saw Su Xianxian's actions from behind, but she was still unmoved. She neither explained nor hesitated, but there was a look of pity on her face. She could feel that Su Xianxian was almost at the end of his rope. As for the tricks of the other party and the comments that were circulating in Great Xia, she neither cared nor was she concerned. Her heart was like an ancient well, without the slightest fluctuation. If others knew about her temperament, they would say, scary. A few days later, in the north of Great Xia, Li Yuanzhu stopped in her tracks, and her breathing was a little uneven. Although there was no fluctuation in her mentality, the color of her clothes had darkened. Even she was in a slightly sorry state at this moment. Su Xianxian fell to the ground without any strength left. Now, can you tell me why? Su Xianxian looked much older than a month ago. His face was covered with many brown spots, making him look like an old man. His eyes were turbid. Nearly half of his teeth were gone. No matter how she looked at him, he looked like an old man with one foot in the grave. Li Yuanzhu sighed. You've really done something wrong. If you don't die, you won't be able to convince the masses. There are so many experts in the world, and many of them are proud and arrogant. If you are an example, I don't know how many people will die. You're dead, but countless people can live. Although you don't deserve to die, you have to. The more Su Xianxian listened, the more puzzled he became. He struggled to sit up and asked, what do the experts in the world have to do with me? Li Yuanzhu told him about the foreign races and the public welfare organization. It's actually not because of the secret residence. Su Xianxian looked surprised. There's no secret residence. It's just a lie. Didn't I say it that day? Li Yuanzhu shook her head slightly. I'm not willing. Su Xianxian yelled and spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were wide open, and he stopped breathing. He could never have imagined that he would die because of such a reason. He could never have imagined that these things would happen after he left. He never thought that there would be no secret residence. He had been poisoned, and it was an injustice. Chapter 922. Li Yuanzhu's pursuit of Su Xianxian caused a huge uproar in Great Xia. Even the imperial court and the volunteer army of the Great Xia dynasty, which were in full swing, were affected by this storm. After all, she was the third most powerful expert in the world. While Li Fu and Su Wuming were in seclusion, she was the most powerful person in the world. In particular, Li Yuanzhu had never killed a single person in the past few years when her name shook the world. As a result, everyone in the world held her in high esteem. Almost everyone who had seen Li Yuanzhu felt that she was a fairy-like figure. She was indifferent, aloof, and had nothing to worry about in the world. Although it was right in front of you, it felt like it was looking down at you from the distant horizon. However, it was such a person who had broken his rule of never killing people and chased after Su Xianxian, who was ranked 23rd in the world. These two identities alone were enough to attract people's attention, not to mention the words that Su Xianxian shouted along the way. It had to be said that Su Xianxian's plan to ruin Li Yuanzhu's reputation had succeeded to a certain extent. Although the content was unbelievable, it made people have more suspicions and opinions about her. Even Shinichi's sex reputation plummeted. For many days, there was a lot of noise in front of the mountain gate. If she joined the barbarians in the south, it would be a huge blow to the people of Great Xia. The most outstanding and youngest supreme expert in Great Xia had actually sided with the barbarians. How could everyone accept this? Even the scholars who used to regard her as a fairy and supported her the most did not know whether they should continue to believe her at this moment. Ren Baqian naturally received this news as well. He didn't expect the matter to blow up so much. Fame and fortune, these were the few things that people cared about in life. How many people could really let go of something like reputation? Under such circumstances, Li Yuanzhu didn't explain anything at all. This woman is pretty ruthless. Ren Baqian smacked his lips. He really didn't expect this young lady to be so decisive. She had completely thrown her reputation aside. However, another piece of information sent to him made his expression darken. On the 15th day of the 9th month, Li Yuanzhu chased after Su Xianxian for 20 days. More than 300 disciples and odd job workers from Luohua sect were all exterminated. All of the dead were either killed by heavy weapons such as maces and iron rods, or chopped into pieces by long swords. The traces at the scene showed that there were at least dozens of people involved. Based on the traces left behind, the identity of the murderer was on the verge of being revealed. After all, other than the Aboriginals, only a few Aboriginals would use weapons like a mace or a metal rod that was as thick as an arm. Using a long saber to chop people into pieces was also a method used by Aboriginal warriors. Furthermore, even though Su Xianxian wasn't in Luohua sect, the remaining people weren't mediocre. There was still a spirit will expert and several earth will experts. Many people could kill them. However, there weren't many people who could do this when dozens of experts were using such weapons and none of them managed to escape. The entire pugilistic world of the Great Xia dynasty fell to a freezing point. All the warriors were filled with resentment. First, Li Yuanzhu had tried to kill Su Xianxian. At that time, Li Yuanzhu had even told Su Xianxian that she would protect Luohua sect. Then, the Aboriginal barbarians had destroyed Luohua sect, killing everyone in the sect, including women and children. For a time, the resentment of Great Xiao's warriors toward the Aboriginals and Li Yuanzhu reached its peak. No one considered whether someone was trying to frame the Aboriginals. With the reputation of the Aboriginals, was there a need to shift the blame? However, Renbaqian knew that he had been F*King framed. Renbaqian's face was gloomy, and he didn't know what kind of expression to make. I was F*King staying in Lon City to learn technology, but I was actually framed. That's right, he had been framed. This was because he was in charge of the rearguard commandery, which was in charge of the areas outside of Dayo. Mobilize people to investigate and find out who did it, Renbaqian said in a deep voice. Yes, Your Highness. By the time Renbaqian received the news, half a month had already passed. During this half a month, batches of experts had gone to Luohua sect to check on the situation. Even if there were any clues, they would probably be gone by now. However, they had to investigate. The other party didn't just want to destroy Luohua sect. Obviously, the other party's target was either Li Yuanzhu or Dayo. Renbaqian felt that the latter was more likely. After all, Li Yuanzhu originally had an excellent reputation in Great Xia. Although she had caused an uproar recently, no one would make a move on her so quickly. In that case, the other party's target was Dayo. What was the other party's purpose? What was the other party going to do? Now was the time to establish a new organization. Once that batch of experts returned from the 60,000 mountains, it would be time to recruit them wantonly. If the hatred between the practitioners of Dayo and Great Xia was stirred up, there would be many twists and turns. Well, there was actually a lot of hatred. Back when Great Xia attacked Dayo, a large number of martial artists from Great Xia died in the warrior camp. However, it was different this time. In particular, the other party was still hiding in the dark. This was only the first time that Luohua sect had made a move, and they might do something else. Under such circumstances, they couldn't be left alone. Pass down the order. Don't let go of even the slightest clue. Report back immediately if there is any information. Renbaqian was afraid that his subordinates would be negligent, so he repeated the order. Rest assured, Your Highness. Renbaqian nodded and put the 2 pieces of information in his arms. After leaving the rearguard commandery, he squinted his eyes with a faint smile on his face. First, he went to the Ministry of Works to look for Tong Jinye. Principal. A young and tender voice sounded very familiar. Renbaqian turned his head and saw that it was a student who had just graduated from the academy. He was wearing the uniform of the Ministry of Works and still looked young and inexperienced. Renbaqian smiled and chatted with him for a while. Although he called him Yague every day in the academy, he was very respectful toward Renbaqian after leaving the academy. These students who entered the Ministry of Works were all technical officers and were highly valued by Tong Jinye. Although they were still young and inexperienced, things were going smoothly. Renbaqian was relieved after hearing this. He forced himself to say a few words and went to look for Tong Jinye. The main reason was that the road between Lon City and the Yun Nation had collapsed during the rainy season, burying nearly 100 prisoners of war. Tong Jinye didn't take it seriously. Although there weren't many collapses like this, it was normal for people to die. However, Renbaqian was very concerned about it. Deaths were one thing, but what if there were more collapses in the future? After arguing with Tong Jinye for a long time, they finally decided to send 2 student officers to the scene. This was also a form of training for them. If they could solve the situation there, it would prove their ability and the effectiveness of Black Bamboo Academy's education. Back in the palace, the Empress was holding a large bucket of calcium milk and drinking it non-stop. Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were still pouring the milk into the bucket. Although the wine pool hadn't been formed yet, the Empress's bucket of calcium milk had already appeared. Seeing Renbachien, the Empress thought of the wine pool and meat forest and asked lazily, "Where's my wine pool?" Recently, the Empress had been getting more and more lazy, and he wasn't sure if it was because of her pregnancy. However, it had already been 10 months, and the Empress's belly was only slightly bulging, which couldn't be seen when she wore clothes. As for labor, there wasn't any movement at all. Renbachien was already very calm about this and was afraid that the Empress was really going to give birth to a Najah. "Your Majesty, the new city has already started construction. Let's put the wine pool in the new palace," Renbachien said. "You are getting more and more fooling me." The Empress snorted. Renbachien smiled bitterly. It wasn't easy for her to change to calcium milk. Wouldn't she revert to her old ways if she was given a wine pool now? He casually showed the 2 pieces of intelligence to the Empress and told her about it as an interesting story. "Your Majesty, we have been framed." The Empress glanced at them and said, "It's their business to think what they want. We just have to do our own thing. The Aboriginals and Great Sia have always had a lot of enmity, but so what? If they really block the way, just kill them." Renbachien spread his hands and said, "Are all experts like this?" "Your Majesty is like this, and so is that little girl Li Yuanzhu." Renbachien did it on purpose. When he talked about Li Yuanzhu in such a frivolous tone, the Empress wouldn't suddenly become inexplicably jealous. Sure enough, as he expected, the Empress didn't care at all and said, "Under the general trend, no matter what they do, it's like a mantis trying to stop a chariot and won't be able to affect the overall situation. You should set your sights higher." Renbachien knew that the Empress was right, but he was still used to being as meticulous as possible. Chapter 9:23. Other than being framed and being made a scapegoat, everything else went smoothly. Except for the last 2 sections of the cement road from Lawn City to the Yun Nation, the rest of the road had been built. It was expected to be completed in another 4 months. With this road, the travel time between Lawn City and the Yun Nation could be reduced by half, and a lot of manpower and material consumption could be reduced when transporting supplies. Renbachien had already started to prepare for the construction of the second official road. He originally envisioned that the second road would be from Lawn City to Tiesua Pass, which was originally an important border town of Great Sia and was now the location of the Protectorate of the North. However, Renbachien now planned to build the official road from Lawn City to the Protectorate of the Southeast. This was the only way to transport large amounts of coal and rubber. The transportation of large amounts of resources was the most important thing now. Since Great Sia couldn't take care of itself and couldn't take care of the South, the road to the Protectorate of the North wasn't that meaningful. The Zhang family from the Yun Nation had recruited a large number of people to Lawn City. In particular, these blacksmiths from the Yun Nation had brought a lot of new technology to Deo. Although Renbachien directly took out the blast furnace and hydraulic forging equipment, these indigenous methods of the blacksmiths from the Yun Nation played a great role in many areas and greatly improved the smelting standards of Lawn City. The improvement of this technology could be seen from the layers of beautiful satin patterns on the swords and knives on the market recently. The most important thing was that the first diesel internal combustion engine prototype was finally successfully produced after many explosions. Although it was still a little crude and needed to be improved and reduced over the generations, this was expected. The most important point was that Deo had produced the first diesel internal combustion engine, which meant that the craftsmanship and materials had met the basic requirements. This was what Renbachien was concerned about. However, Renbachien discovered a bad sign. At present, the goal of the group of rascals from the Black Bamboo Academy's first year of high school seemed to be a little off. They seemed to be more interested in researching how to make the internal combustion engine explode more violently. This could be seen from the recent explosion accidents at the Diesel Internal Combustion Engine Research Institute. Although the principle of the internal combustion engine was to generate power through explosions, Renbochin had to raise his gun and shoot for another 5 minutes as a warning when a wall of the research institute was blown up. However, this group of bastards had learned to move like a snake now. After more than half a month, Renbochin finally saw Li Yuanzhu, who had returned. The head you wanted. Li Yuanzhu, who was dressed in a Daoist robe, placed a box on the table. I did what I promised you. But what about Luohua sect? I have been framed. Renbochin smiled bitterly. This matter really has nothing to do with me. If I wanted to, I wouldn't have agreed to it back then. Directly using a nuclear bomb would be the most effective deterrent. Since I've promised you, there's no need to do anything unnecessary. Li Yuanzhu nodded and said faintly, I think so too. You wouldn't do such an unwise thing. Are there any clues? No, we got the news too late. We couldn't find any clues at the scene. Moreover, the other party stopped after attacking once. Now, we can only wait for him to attack again. Li Yuanzhu thought for a while and said, recently, there has been a lot of discussion about this in Great Xia. This time, it's different from Qi Zixiao destroying the 9 pavilions. The 9 pavilions had a bad reputation, and many people resented them. Although there were some people who complained about it, there were also many people who applauded it. The impact of this matter was more about Qi Zixiao being able to destroy the 9 pavilions alone. However, Luohua sect is completely different this time. All the sects reacted very strongly, probably feeling sympathy for the loss of their own kind. If the Aboriginals can do whatever they want in Great Xia and wipe out an entire sect, Luohua sect will become them tomorrow. They are in Great Xia, but they have to worry about the Aboriginals. Do you understand this feeling, Prince Zhao? I understand, but this matter can't be explained clearly, and no one will listen. We can only wait for the murderer to appear again. Jinrenli, have you been affected? Renbochin asked. It's fine. You don't have to think too much, Prince Zhao, Li Yuanzhu replied faintly. Renbochin nodded and said, if Shenyi's sect encounters any trouble, we can move to the Yun nation. We share the same roots and culture as Great Xia. Li Yuanzhu glanced at Renbochin and said, Prince Zhao, you have underestimated our Shenyi sect. If we run away when we encounter trouble, Shenyi's sect won't be able to survive for nearly 1,000 years. Renbochin laughed it off as it was just a suggestion. If Shenyi's sect really moved to the Yun nation, he would welcome it. However, the possibility was almost zero. Li Yuanzhu looked indifferent, but she was actually quite stubborn. You have worked hard, Jinrenli. Renbochin opened the box and saw a person's head that had been salted with lime. His face could still be vaguely seen. However, Renbochin was a little surprised. Su Xianxian. It was Prince Zhao who poisoned him. Are you still surprised? Li Yuanzhu's tone wasn't dissatisfied, and she spoke very casually. Poison. Renbochin was even more surprised. When did he poison him? He was already poisoned before I went. Prince Zhao is surprised. Could it be that you didn't poison him? Li Yuanzhu was a little puzzled when she saw Renbochin's reaction. Renbochin frowned and shook his head. I didn't poison him. It seems that the murderer has been eyeing Su Xianxian for a long time. However, Su Xianxian is the 23rd most powerful expert in the world. How could he be targeted so easily? The other party's strength seems to be unexpectedly strong. Li Yuanzhu closed her eyes slightly, opened them a moment later, and said, no matter who they are, they will eventually give themselves away. Renbochin didn't know about Su Xianxian's experience. He didn't know that Su Xianxian had stayed in the center of the nuclear explosion for 10 days and even carried a large piece of glass from the explosion with him. He only lost his hair and had some problems, but he was already considered a strong spirit wool expert. If he were an ordinary person, he would have died more than once. However, Su Xianxian thought that it was Renbaqian who poisoned him and naturally wouldn't say what he had done. Li Yuanzhu thought that it was Renbaqian who poisoned him and naturally didn't ask any more questions. Renbaqian knew that he hadn't poisoned Su Xianxian, but Su Xianxian had been poisoned. He subconsciously thought that someone had done something behind the scenes and didn't think that Su Xianxian had stayed in the center of the nuclear explosion for too long and was affected by the radiation. An inexplicable misunderstanding occurred just like that, causing Renbaqian to overestimate the strength of the mastermind. Renbaqian thought for a moment and said, "Besides Su Xianxian, there seemed to be 2 other people in the vicinity that day, but they didn't show themselves. If Su Xianxian was targeted, then someone must have known about what happened at that time, which led to the series of events that followed. Those 2 people were the most suspicious, and it wasn't impossible for those who joined the Go Home organization to be involved." Renbaqian felt that he should start with those 2 people, but he had to pay attention to the others as well. "If there's nothing else, I'll be leaving to take a look at the 60,000 mountains. Give me that radio station of yours if you have more," Li Yuanzhu said. Renbaqian naturally agreed to this request. After sending her off the next day, Renbaqian learned the identities of those 2 people from the experts who went to the 60,000 mountains. Miao Yulong, the fallen phoenix hairpin, and Ruan San, the water dragon king. It just so happened that these 2 people had enmity with the aboriginals. The former's good friend was killed by Hongwu, while the latter had one ear and one eye cut off by Qi Ziding. Following the order, the embroidered uniform guards in the rearguard commandery began to investigate the 2 people. On the other hand, Renbaqian had to return to Earth to pick up a group of 11 people, including 6 physicists, 2 chemists, 1 zoologist, 1 botanist, and 1 mathematician. This group of people was Ning Caichen's harvest these days. They would be the first batch of high-end talents in this world. Chapter 924. There was a slight distortion in the air, and a stick of candied hawthorn appeared out of thin air. To be exact, it was a person and a string of people tied up with a rope. Renbaqian was holding onto a rope that had 12 people tied up. There was one more person than expected. This was Ning Caichen's harvest and a very important person who could speak many languages. Such a person was simply too useful to Renbaqian. Not only were the 12 people blindfolded, but they were also unconscious. Renbaqian loosened the rope, carried the box, and opened the door to summon the guards. "Keep an eye on these people." The guards were shocked when they came in. On one hand, it was because there were suddenly more than 10 people in the room, but more so because of their appearance. They had sunken eyes, big noses, red, yellow, and chestnut hair, and 2 of them were as black as carbon. "Are these mountain spirits?" The 2 guards immediately admired Renbaqian. They didn't expect Xiao Prince Consort to capture the rumored mountain spirits. "Let me know when they wake up." Renbaqian nodded slightly. Since they misunderstood them as mountain spirits, he would let them be. He went back to see the Empress first. "Did you bring anything for me?" The Empress looked at Renbaqian's hand expectantly as if she was waiting for her husband to return from a trip with a message. Well, she was actually just bored and wanted to see something new. Clang, clang, clang. Renbaqian walked around, placed the box on the table in front of the Empress, and asked, "Your Majesty, guess what's inside?" "Anyway, it's not sorghum liquor." The Empress chuckled and was in a good mood. She had long sensed that Renbaqian thought that alcohol had an effect on the ball in her stomach. Although she didn't think it was a problem, she still drank less alcohol and more calcium milk. Although she really liked the sweet and sour taste, it didn't mean that this drink could replace alcohol. Even though she was the most respected person in the world, she also understood that there had to be tolerance and compromise between two people when they were together. Many people from Earth in Renbochen's generation didn't understand this point. It was obvious that the Empress had put in a lot of effort. The latest 3D projection device. Renbochen opened the box and saw a box-like device and a few pairs of glasses. This was the latest experimental model, and its usage was similar to that of a computer. The screen was projected directly into the air, and there was no need for fog like before. However, it required special glasses. Most importantly, this device was completely controlled by the mind. It was completely separated from the buttons, mouse, keyboard, and controller. How do I use it? The Empress was very interested. Your Majesty, put on these glasses and press this button. Whatever you want to do after that, Your Majesty only needs to think about it. You can watch movies and play games. Renbochen put the glasses on the Empress's head. He then put on a pair of glasses for himself and taught her how to use them. Through their glasses, the two of them could see the hologram projected from the top of the box. The width was 4.5 meters and the height was about 2.8 meters. This was a common height for residential buildings on Earth. For the Empress, who had always been using a laptop, this size was already a huge surprise. She felt that her entire field of vision was covered by the screen. With a thought from the Empress, the icons of various television dramas appeared on the screen. Following which, the Empress chose a television series. It's exactly the same as the real thing, the Empress said in surprise. The television series that appeared on the screen was completely three-dimensional. It was as if the real person was right in front of her. Renbochen hugged the Empress and watched the television series for a while. The Empress had a smile on her face throughout. This gift was simply too much to her liking. Renbochen brought back a few pairs of glasses and gave one pair to Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan. After all, the Empress looked at the scenes that others couldn't see and made all kinds of expressions, giving people the impression that she was a fool. Moreover, there were many times when one could only see things that one could see, and it was far less enjoyable than seeing the same things as others. The people who were brought back woke up that night, and Renbochen went to see them the next day. Sir, they woke up last night and were making a lot of noise. I persuaded them a little, and they quickly quietened down, the guard said to Renbochen. Well done. Renbochen nodded. He knew all too well how the Aboriginals persuaded people. Everyone, this is the second time we meet. Renbochen opened the door and saw everyone panicking. He smiled and greeted them. Then, he understood why these people quickly quietened down. Most of them had bruises and swollen faces. One of them seemed to have a broken arm, and another was sitting on the ground dragging his leg. Sure enough, it was the usual method of persuading people used by the Aboriginals. However, it didn't matter as long as they weren't dead. The medicine in this world was pretty effective. Moreover, it would also let the other party know who was the boss here. Seeing a burly man like Renbochen come in, the crowd couldn't hide their panic at first. Then, they started to make noise like a market. The content was nothing more than, "Who are you? Where is this? This is kidnapping, and I'm going to sue you. Can you understand what I'm saying?" Translate. Renbochen pointed to a woman who was as black as charcoal. She was about 30 years old and only wore a set of underwear. Who are you? What are you doing? Where is this place? The black woman asked in Mandarin with a northeastern accent. Renbochen immediately felt a sense of familiarity. Welcome to the Chief God's space. Think about it carefully. Don't you have more things in your heads? Renbochen smiled. Just kidding. Welcome to my world. Renbochen laughed. Well, it's still a joke. Welcome to a whole new world, Renbochin finally said. After making a few jokes in a row, these people immediately became angry. However, Renbochin didn't care about what they thought. Although these people could be considered fellow countrymen, he had too many fellow countrymen, more than 7 billion of them. The reason why he chose foreign scholars this time was that it was easier to deal with them. If they were Chinese, they would have to consider their feelings and country at the same time. First of all, I have to tell you a very unfortunate piece of news. You can't go back and will have to live here. You need to work for me, analyze everything in this world, and do what I want you to do. If you do well, I won't treat you harshly. You can spend the rest of your lives here. Anyway, you have no family on Earth and nothing to worry about. Moreover, this is a whole new world with new rules and full of unknowns. Isn't this the best reward for you? After the black woman translated in English and Spanish, the crowd suddenly became noisy again. You're a liar. I don't believe it. This is impossible. You're lying to us. This is kidnapping. You will go to jail. Renbochin couldn't understand such words anyway. He just exerted force with his feet, and the tiles on the ground suddenly exploded. As Renbochin stretched out his palm, a spear appeared in his hand. After brandishing it, the gold and silver spear turned into a bolt of lightning and pierced into the ground. An iron chain came out of Renbochin's body and tied up the tall white man who shouted the loudest like a snake. It kept shrinking inward as if it wanted to break all the bones in the other party's body. Such a miraculous scene caused everyone to open their mouths wide, momentarily speechless. Do you understand now? Law. Here, I am the law. As I said, this is a whole new world, completely different from Earth. What you have to do is what I want you to do. Renbochin smiled kindly at everyone. Come on, I'll show you. Renbochin waved his hand, turned around, and walked out. Everyone was a little uneasy, but they still followed him. They were eager to know what this place was and whether what Renbochin said was true. The first thing they saw were 2 bear-like guards. The ferocity and savagery of these people left a deep impression on them, and they immediately shivered. After looking around carefully, they saw a magnificent palace and a blue sky that was bluer than Earth. With a cry of surprise, a white woman in her 50s rushed toward the garden in front of her. She opened her eyes wide and carefully examined the various plants in the garden, exclaiming in surprise. Chapter 9:25. As the plants in the garden attracted the botanist, the birds in the trees and the insects in the garden also attracted the zoologist. In particular, he couldn't take his eyes off the bees that were the size of a finger. One had to know that the largest honey bee on Earth was only 1.5 to 1.8 centimeters long, but the bees flying in the garden were more than 6 centimeters long. They were even bigger than the tiger-head bee. At this moment, they were flying around the flowers, and it was obvious that they were picking the pollen. These bees were enough to surprise him, not to mention the birds in the trees that he had never seen before. The atmospheric pressure here is higher than normal, a physicist with a swollen face said with a frown. In fact, he had already noticed this when he first arrived, but he didn't say it out loud. After Renbochin said that this was another world, the incredulous crowd began to search for the differences between this world and Earth in order to find an answer. Renbochin brought everyone to the courtyard where the Crow General was. In his opinion, Qi Shui was more convincing. However, Qi Shui lay at the bottom of the lake every day and wouldn't come out unless the Empress called for it. Fortunately, the 3.5 meters tall Crow General was scary enough. It stood there like a wall, and its black feathers reflected the light of metal. Renbochin patted the side of the Crow General's body, but it only turned to look at him before closing its eyes to rest. Oh my God, this is simply as miraculous as King Kong. The biologist exclaimed and rushed forward to stroke the Crow General's feathers. The Crow General simply waved its wings, which were relatively short compared to its body size, and sent the biologist flying. He spat out blood in midair. In the face of a Cardinal Heaven expert, ordinary people were simply too weak and insignificant. The others were immediately shocked. See if he's still breathing. Get someone from the clinic to come over. Renbachien called over the guards, turned to the crowd, and warned, I'm not responsible for your lives. You have to be responsible for yourselves. You have to understand that in this world, apart from your brains and knowledge, you are as fragile as a baby in other aspects. Everyone looked at the biologist who was lying on the ground, gasping for air. Their faces turned pale, and their eyes were filled with fear. However, in the afternoon, the biologist was alive and kicking again. Well, it was still a little worse than being alive and kicking, but at least he was able to walk and his life was saved. Looking at his guilty expression, it was clear that the Crow General had taught him a lesson. At night, everyone saw 2 moons in the sky. One was a very big red moon, and the other was only half the size of the moon that Earthlings knew of. Everyone finally dispelled the last bit of hope in their hearts. This was not Earth. Of course, there was a lot of evidence, but these 2 moons were even more direct and inexplicable. The next day, when Renbachien saw everyone again, he wore his trademark good-natured smile. Everyone, do you have any more questions about what I said? How did we get here? We seem to have been kidnapped and locked up for a period of time. Did you do it? Who are you? Everyone discussed for the whole night and finally reached a consensus. This was a problem that everyone was very concerned about. You are the chosen ones by the Lord God, members of Earth's advance team. You shoulder the expectations of your respective countries and all of humanity. Although I really want to say that, I never lie. That's right, you've been kidnapped to a completely different world. Aren't you curious? Apart from Earth, there's another planet with humans living on it. You didn't come here by spacecraft, but by some more magical method. What I want you to do is to uncover the most fundamental secret of this world, the rules of this world. Renbachien was very patient with these people. After all, he needed the knowledge in their minds, so he didn't mind spending some time answering their questions. He waited for the black woman to translate in both languages before speaking again. As for me, I'm an official of this country, one of the higher-ups of this country, and I can decide your life and death. Of course, I know what you want to ask. That's right, I'm also an Earthling. As soon as he said this, there was indeed some change in their gazes. They were burning, probing, and, of course, dissatisfied and fearful. From this, one could see the personalities of these people. Some people had a stronger desire for knowledge and were eager to explore the unknown. Such a world was obviously a treasure for them. There were also some people who were knowledgeable, but in many ways, they were no different from ordinary people. They would be afraid, disappointed, and resentful. Of course, without their knowledge, they were just ordinary people. I've prepared a research institute for you. Don't even think about escaping. With your looks, you will be treated as monsters and beaten to death in minutes. Of course, you won't have the chance to escape. I just hope that you won't make any wrong choices. How you will fare in the future will depend on whether or not you can meet my requirements. Don't worry, I'm a tolerant person and won't be too harsh on you. In fact, you will only be valued here, valued by me. On Earth, you are all people who are marginalized, mediocre, and overshadowed by the brilliance of others. In this case, you should be cheering. Here, you are the only you. After the black woman finished translating, someone immediately argued, my research is about to produce results, and all the physicists will remember my name. Sorry, you won't have a chance. However, you can let everyone in this world remember your name. Renbachien spread his hands. Now that you understand the situation, I'll give you 1 day to sort out your emotions. Tomorrow, I'll send you to the research institute. Before this, Rinpoche had already built a research institute in the nearby mountains. It was about half a day's journey from Lon City on a fast horse. If he rode the Crow General, it would only take 2 hours. May I ask what your name is? Are you Chinese? Did the mystical martial arts from China come from this world? A man suddenly asked, and the black woman translated. Very smart. Rinpoche gave a thumbs up. I like smart people, so I won't lie to you. That's right, it came from here. As for me, you can call me Zhao Prince Consort. Does the Chinese government know about this place? Does our government know about this place? Maybe they do, but no one can come here. This isn't a place that can be reached with current technology. This isn't the Moon, Mars, anywhere in the solar system, or anywhere in the Milky Way galaxy. It's not even in the same universe. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that the universe isn't unique. Parallel worlds do exist. As for the rest, you will have to discover them. Rinpoche spoke to everyone, leaving them to think and sort out their emotions. He still had other things to do. Mr. Zhao, can you give us some clothes? The black woman tried to suppress her panic and smiled at Rinpoche. She was still pretty on Earth, but in Rinpoche's eyes, the only valuable thing was her brain. She was wearing a set of underwear, and there were other people wearing all kinds of clothes. She wasn't the only one wearing underwear. Rinpoche smiled and nodded. I'll get someone to send it over. Also, my surname isn't Zhao. You can call me Zhao Prince Consort or Boss. That night, these people quarreled for 2 hours. After the Imperial Guard started to persuade them, they quickly quieted down. The next day, Rinpoche and the Imperial Guards personally escorted them to the Research Institute. After 2 nights of transition, these people roughly understood their current situation. They also maintained enough reverence for Rinpoche and kept quiet. Of course, the terrifying power of the Crow General, which seriously injured the biologist and left her on the verge of death with a gentle flap of its wings, was a sufficient deterrent. The Imperial Guard's physical persuasion was also sufficiently effective. All of these factors combined allowed these unorganized and undisciplined researchers to behave themselves. Along the way, these people would lift the curtains of the ox carriages to peek at the outside world. Everything they saw showed what kind of civilized society they were in. The various sights in Lon City made them curious, and they momentarily forgot that they had been kidnapped to another world. There were also all kinds of mounts that could be seen everywhere in Lon City, such as mountain-gazing birds and saber-toothed tigers. These strange creatures attracted most of their attention. The Research Institute was located halfway up the mountain. In between, there were 2 3-story cement buildings that covered an area of more than 1,000 square meters. These were the so-called research institutes. In addition, there were 2 rows of terraced brick houses. There were a total of 30 houses, and each house could accommodate 4 people. They had 7 or 8 acres of land, which allowed them to grow some things. Outside, there was a 2-meter-tall courtyard wall. This wasn't to prevent them from escaping, but to prevent ferocious beasts from breaking in. In addition, there were 50 winged cavalry warriors divided into 2 shifts to guard the place. It was simply a waste to arrange for 50 Kismet heaven-winged cavalry warriors in such a place. However, Rinpoche valued them so much that he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. After arranging for everyone to be here, they sorted out their emotions, put aside other things, and immediately threw themselves into the preliminary preparations. Although Rinpoche had prepared some modern tools, they were simply not worth mentioning compared to their requirements. A large list was made and handed over to Rinpoche. Everyone, supercomputers, particle accelerators, large colliders. Are you kidding me? Face the reality, everyone. Remember that you live in a world that is 500 to 1,000 years behind Earth's technology. You need equipment that can be used immediately, that is simpler, and that can be learned from the basics. Instruments that are too complicated and delicate aren't practical. After hearing what Rinpoche said, everyone finally recognized the reality and reopened the list. Although there were still some things that made Rinpoche scratch his head, most of them were still acceptable. After asking about each piece of equipment, Rinpoche marked the order of the supplies. Chapter 926. The head of the Department of Inspection, Tai Yen, returned with more than 40 sword masters. 3 of them were at the spirit will level, and the rest were at the earth will level. However, in Rinpoche's eyes, strength was only a supplementary skill of these sword masters. Their true use was their superb learning ability. There were more than 40 people of all ages and genders. They wore coarse clothes with many pockets and looked like beggar elders. However, there were many benefits to this kind of clothing in the wilderness. Welcome, everyone. Rinpoche said these words again after just a few days. He suddenly felt that all the heroes in the world had fallen into his trap. He was thinking too much. However, in some ways, Deo did have a very high starting point. With these people, as long as they implemented universal education and cultivated talent, Rinpoche believed that Deo would soon usher in a period of great development. Many people looked at the bald man in front of them and the dozens of guards around him and felt a little uneasy. Although they believed Du Mengyang and Ling Du's words, they still felt uneasy. Only after a few months, when they were on the right track and Rinpoche's promise began to come true, would their uneasiness gradually disappear. Rinpoche settled everyone in the city, told them about the situation, gave them various books, and asked them about the situation along the way. As Rinpoche expected, it wasn't that easy for these people to arrive. It took 2 months to gather everyone together. Du Mengyang and Ling Du explained everything, which naturally aroused some doubts. After all, the people in this organization had different purposes. Regardless of whether this matter was true or not, some people didn't want to see it happen. In the end, a chaotic battle broke out and 7 or 8 people died. Most of the remaining people followed the 2 of them to Deo, but the others were nowhere to be found. In any case, it's good that all of you arrived safely, Rinpoche said. Then, he said with some regret, it's a pity that 7 or 8 people died. In his heart, every sword master was a treasure that could play a great role in the future. What a pity. However, his attitude warmed the hearts of the 2 of them. At least they could see that he valued them. Settle down first. I will arrange for someone to give you lessons later. Given your speed, I believe that you will soon meet my requirements. After settling them down, Rinpoche returned to Earth. There were too many things that needed to be prepared. Centrifuge, a mass center of mass motion demonstrator, thermal analyzer, dynamic tester, sky balancer, incubator, spectrometer, optical instrument, reaction apparatus, physical measurement apparatus. Although some of the pipettes, funnels, flasks, and the like were made by himself, the number of instruments that needed to be brought back from Earth was not small. Moreover, many of the instruments that could be replicated had to be drawn and measured by craftsmen after they were brought back, and the data had to be saved for future use. In addition, some of the students in the academy were also sent to study diesel generators, which were intended to be used in the laboratory. Rinpoche was very considerate in setting up the research site for diesel generators in the laboratory in the mountains. When the students first saw the foreigners with red, yellow, sunken eyes, and high noses, they were shocked and thought that they were mountain spirits that had escaped from somewhere. They were exactly the same as the guards of the public. If Rinpoche hadn't spoken up in time, those scholars would have been beaten up again. Tong Lan's little fists were about to hit someone's face. She appeared in front of everyone at an extremely fast speed as if she had teleported. When she stopped, the wind created by her fist startled the scholars and made them shrink like quails. I can't hit him. He looks weird and scary. Tong Lan pouted and was a little dissatisfied. Renbochin sneered and said, when your grandfather returns, he will spank your butt into 2 pieces. He won't hit me. Tong Lan squinted at Renbochin and gritted her teeth. Unfortunately, the other party was Xiao Prince Consort, so she couldn't hit him anymore. Ever since the trip to the 60,000 mountains, she couldn't hit him anymore. Isn't it supposed to be 2 pieces? Du Laolu said and was sent flying the next second. Remember, in the future, respect them as the teachers of the academy. Each of them is a talent who is proficient in a certain aspect. If your knowledge is 1, their knowledge is 20 or even higher, Renbochin reminded them carefully. Renbochin turned to look at the frightened scholars and said, don't worry. Oh my god, I thought I was going to die just now. I almost suffocated. How can such a big child have such a fast speed? His fist can bring about such a strong wind. If it hit my head, it would have been smashed like a watermelon. A middle-aged woman patted her chest and said. Needless to say, Tong Lan's move made them understand one thing. Here, even a child could easily kill them. Moreover, the children here were very interested in taking their lives. The people here are really barbaric. After all, this is a primitive society. You can't expect it to be the same as the United States. Am I the only one who thinks that the leader, Zhao, is more terrifying? Renbochin listened to the rapid chatter of the foreigners with a puzzled look in his eyes. Did someone just talk about him? Fortunately, things got back on track after this small interlude. The students of the academy were studying the diesel generator. Soon, their clumsiness was unbearable to the many scholars who were watching from afar. Oh my god, even the primary school students from our country can do better than them. They actually made a mistake with such a simple thing. They are primitive people, and you can't expect them to be at the same level as primary school students in Germany. In fact, I'm already very surprised that they can do this. At first, they were just watching from afar. Many of the mountain spirits began to gather behind the students and kept muttering. A few students were annoyed by them and turned around to glare at them. If it wasn't for Yague's reminder, they would have taught them what it meant to keep their mouths shut. It meant that they couldn't speak even if they had mouths. The scholars were shocked at first and hid far away. After discussing for a long time and realizing that they weren't beaten up, they moved closer again. Soon, the many scholars couldn't bear it anymore and began to give suggestions. A bunch of them put forward their own opinions, and the black man translated. Soon, the scholars were stunned by the clumsiness and ignorance of the students and were no longer satisfied with muttering. 2 physicists with good hands-on skills began to roll up their sleeves and go into action. The others were idle and began to draw all kinds of sketches. Look, this should be the case here. What you did was wrong. There will be an explosion. After the black man translated, Tong Lan squinted at them and muttered, this bunch of ignorant mountain spirits. However, with the participation of these scholars, the manufacturing process of the diesel generator was indeed greatly accelerated. The technical content of this generator was actually very low, and the only limitation was the speed of the blacksmiths. 10 days later, Renbochin finally saw the first diesel generator. Although it looked a little ugly, it could be put into use immediately. Renbochin couldn't help but sigh. The scholars were indeed scholars. All those years of studying hadn't been in vain. Although he had always thought that those who were better at studying than him were nerds, he had to admit that these nerds did a good job. This speed also made the students of the academy rejoice and began to look up to the mountain spirits. These mountain spirits were still quite capable. Renbochin began to intensify his efforts. While the equipment wasn't ready yet, he simply set up the research site for the diesel engine here. Chapter 927. In the 60,000 Mountains. Chi-Sitting held his walking stick in his hand and sat on a protruding boulder on the mountainside with a gloomy face. He looked into the distance at the world that was engulfed by darkness. Commander. The meat is ready. An Earthwill expert wearing animal skin brought over a 6-feet-long tail of a ferocious beast that was as thick as a thigh. This was Chi-Sitting's favorite, but he just silently took it and sneered, "Those bastards are really slow." "Commander, are you talking about those bastards in the north?" the man asked with a grin. "Get lost. I can call them bastards, but you can't. If they are bastards, what are you?" Chi-Sitting suddenly became furious and scolded the man until his face was covered in dirt. After that, he said, "They have been gone for half a day, right? They still haven't brought those bastards over. It seems like they haven't trained enough." The man, who had been sprayed with saliva, didn't care. The Aboriginals respected the strong. Although Chi-Sitting didn't receive much attention from the outside world, many people still thought of him as the Protector General of the Northeast whose name shook the Yun Nation. He was still an expert feared by the world. It was a pity that if he still had his legs, he would probably have a place among the top experts. It could even be said that he would have a place among the top 5. After all, he had already reached the 13th position on the list of experts. If he used his full strength, the 6th person wouldn't dare to say that he could defeat him in the future. After waiting for another 2 hours, Chi-Sitting threw the tailbone in his hand to one side. He sensed that the people he had sent out had returned. Some of them had restrained their auras, giving off the feeling that they were shrouded in mist. They should be the people who had come. Chi-Sitting supported himself with his walking stick and straightened his body. Although his expression was calm, there was a hint of fierceness in that calmness. This was the fierceness left behind from killing people like scything flax. The newcomers were very fast. Chi-Sitting saw a group of knights riding on various mounts coming from the foot of the mountain. He also saw the figures that followed them from the darkness into the light. Except for one person, he had heard of the others for a long time. The others had also heard of his name for a long time. Ma Hongyu and the others looked up and saw the burly man standing on the mountainside with a walking stick. He had the aura of a ferocious beast that was lurking and ready to pounce on people at any time, so they immediately confirmed his identity. "Commander, I've brought him. You may leave." Chi-Sitting waved his hand, his eyes never leaving the newcomer. He grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth and the smell of blood. "Although I've never seen you before, I know you. I never thought that there would be a day where I would be able to stand with you. The same goes for us." Ma Hongyu said lightly. "Don't worry. Since you've come to an agreement with my sister, I won't cause you any trouble. Do as I say next. Just don't make trouble for me," Chi-Sitting said with a grin. As soon as he said that, many experts immediately frowned. Could it be that he still wanted to command them? "Then we'll do as Commander Chi says." Lin Dong spoke first and then winked at everyone. After all, they had just arrived and didn't understand anything. There was no harm in listening to Chi-Sitting's words. If he really said something unacceptable to them, or if he wanted to use his status to criticize them, it wouldn't be too late for them to fall out with him. Now, the first thing they had to do was to understand the situation here. No one knew it better than these local tyrants. Lin Dong's look was complicated and ever-changing, but everyone understood it at a glance. Although these top experts rarely interacted with each other, they still had a tacit understanding when they met, just like how they had resisted Qi Zixiao's aura together. Moreover, they had traveled together for 5 months. Chi-Sitting grinned and laughed, but he didn't make a sound. He turned around and walked to the back. In that case, find a place to rest first. I'll get someone to prepare delicious food for you every day. Seeing him leave, everyone remained silent and looked for a place to rest. They were still thinking of asking about the foreign races the next day, but they didn't expect Cheese-Eating to send someone to inform them the next day. In addition to Cheese-Eating, there were 11 other Cardinal Heaven-level Aboriginal race experts who had been staying in the 60,000 mountains. These people were dressed in animal skins, had tattoos on their bodies, or simply had a string of white bones on their bodies. All of them looked fierce. They looked at the many experts and were quite curious. These people had been staying in the depths of the 60,000 mountains and had little contact with the outside world. Therefore, they didn't have much hatred for outsiders, especially since both sides had already confirmed their cooperation. They were more curious. At present, we have discovered a foreign race with a human head and a snake body. They should be called the Serpent Race and live on an island in the middle of a lake outside the 5 mountains. They are very sharp, and we will definitely be discovered if we approach them, Cheese-Eating said faintly. He knew the purpose of these people. Although he had given them a show of strength yesterday, he wasn't careless when it came to what needed to be done. However, he omitted something when he introduced them. They didn't approach them not only because they would be discovered, but also because there weren't many Aboriginals who knew how to swim. If they were to fight with the foreign races there, they would probably suffer a great loss. How are you going to deal with them? Su Gongso asked. Is there a need to ask? Since they are all enemies, we have to kill them all to prevent any leaks. Of course, we have to leave a few alive to see if we can get any information out of them. Cheese-Eating sneered, full of killing intent. Although the experts felt that something was wrong, they didn't say anything. After all, according to Rinpoche, these foreign races were all enemies. If they were to attack them and let them escape, there might be big trouble in the future. This involved the entire human race, and they couldn't take any risks. We want to check out the situation first so that we can be prepared, Lin Dong said after some thought. Although Lin Dong was the leader of an evil cult, he was much better at dealing with people than others. Even Cheese-Eating, who was prejudiced against them, couldn't find anything wrong with his words. Cheese-Eating quickly arranged for someone to take them there. Although it was said that a horse would die from running up a mountain, the 5 mountains were only half a day's journey for these experts. After crossing the 5th mountain, everyone saw a vast expanse of blue in front of them. In the middle of this blue was a sizable island. Be careful not to be discovered by them. The person leading the way was an Aboriginal expert with a horn on his nose. His tone was rather strange and his pronunciation wasn't very accurate. Let me give you this. The Aboriginal expert took out a pair of binoculars from his chest pocket and asked with a flaunting expression, "Do you know how to use this thing?" What is this? Everyone had never seen such a thing before. Seeing everyone's reaction, the Aboriginal expert laughed happily and said, "It's a clairvoyant. With this, you can see the scene thousands of kilometers away. From here, you can see the situation on the island. Be careful, this is my treasure. Don't break it." Everyone suddenly felt uncomfortable. When did it become their turn to be looked down upon by the barbarians? Lin Dong carefully took the binoculars. Being able to see the scene thousands of kilometers away was indeed a treasure for scouting purposes. Chapter 928. After using the binoculars to observe the situation in the distance, the experts immediately discovered the significance of the object in their hands. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a treasure. It was made of 2 pieces of polished crystal, and there were no impurities in front of them. More importantly, the function of this thing was that it could zoom in and magnify distant objects by dozens of times. Originally, they could only see things that were dozens of kilometers away, but with this object, they could see dozens of times further. Objects that were thousands of kilometers away could even be seen clearly in detail through this object, and the distance could be adjusted by rotating the lens in front of them. The legendary clairvoyance was nothing more than this. Many experts saw a series of buildings built along the lake on the island. They were very different from human houses and looked like shacks that were casually put up. They looked simpler and more chaotic. The most important thing was that there were some creatures with human bodies and snake tails active on the island. Most of them were females, and there were very few males. They are indeed the human-like creatures that Xiao Prince Consort mentioned. They are called the Nagas, right? They have human bodies and snake tails, and we have seen 191 of them so far. Judging from their living conditions, they are still relatively primitive. However, there is a statue in the center of the island, which should be the god they worship. Ma Hongyu looked at it for a while before passing the binoculars to the next person. Judging from the number of shacks, there should be about 300 foreign races on the island. They feed on fish and birds, and the weakest among them is at least at the earth wheel level. In addition, their buildings seem to have exits underwater. Su Gongso had a grave expression on his face. If the weakest among them was at the earth wheel level, then how strong would their experts be? One had to know that the ordinary aboriginals were only at the man-will level, and these foreign races were much stronger than the aboriginals. Furthermore, there were exits underwater, which meant that it would be very difficult to eliminate all of them. If the other party wanted to escape, it would be very difficult to stop them. The only reassuring thing was that there weren't many of them. However, this was the only place. One had to know that there were still many foreign races outside the mountains, which were the real enemies of the human race. That statue isn't their god. It should be a hero or a king or something like that. Usually, in order to enhance the image of the god, the statue of a god will have some different parts. This will create a sense of the unknown, which is beneficial for the believers to revere. This is especially true for these relatively primitive foreign races. Lin Dong was more concerned about the statue in the center of the island and made his own analysis. After putting down the binoculars, he smiled at everyone and said, "It's a personal habit. Please forgive me." Righteous sect was able to become the #1 evil sect in Great Xia by relying on the hard work and professional knowledge of every generation sect master. The corners of everyone's mouths twitched. "I know you're the sect master of the righteous sect, so you don't need to emphasize it again. I'm curious about one thing. How do these creatures reproduce?" Gao Yi asked after a while. Everyone immediately looked over. They really couldn't tell that the thick-browed and big-eyed Gao Yi was actually this kind of person. "I'm just curious. If we know how they reproduce, it'll be easier to understand their fertility." Gao Yi was a little embarrassed when he saw everyone's expressions. He found an impeccable excuse for himself. Their tails can be opened and closed, allowing them to extend their genitals, the ancient race expert explained to everyone. This time, everyone looked at him with a strange expression. "Gao Yi was just saying it, and you actually researched it." The Aboriginal expert was very calm and said, "Their mating is quite interesting. You can watch it tonight. They will be mating by the lake." Everyone stared at him for a long time and couldn't help but think to themselves, these barbarians have no sense of propriety. Things that can't be said in Great Xia are as normal as the movement of the stars in their eyes. In the eyes of the people of Great Xia, this kind of thing could only be understood and not explained, even though Great Xia's culture and industry were thousands of times better than Dao's, and even the scholars talked about romantic affairs. In their opinion, the only normal person in Dao who could communicate with them was probably Renbaqian. However, if they knew that Renbaqian was preparing to print a large number of erotic pictures and pornography to increase the reproduction ability of the Aboriginals, this idea would probably change. Everyone checked the mountain for a long time and confirmed Renbaqian's words. All that was left to do was to defeat these foreign races and confirm their confessions. After that, everyone returned to where the Aboriginals were and decided when and how to attack. There were more than 500 Aboriginals here, including 12 Cardinal Heaven experts, which was considered a considerable combat power. In addition, there were also 500 Kismet Heaven experts. Coupled with those strangely shaped mounts, the combat power of these people could be increased by 30%, which was just enough to deal with the commoners of the foreign races. What they were concerned about were the experts of the foreign races. The island wasn't too big. It was about 10 kilometers long and only 3 or 4 kilometers wide. There was a row of shacks on the southern side of the lake. In the center of the island was a statue that was dozens of meters tall. Below the statue was a pedestal and a flight of steps. In front of the statue, many fish were placed as tributes. Every day at sunset, the people of the Negu race on the island would offer food in front of the statue, pray for blessings, and then enjoy the day's harvest. The huge size of the lake and the abundance of aquatic products made the Negu race not worry about a lack of food. After enjoying the food, many of the commoners of the Negu race would mate at the edge of the lake. The Negu race didn't know that they were being watched. The few binoculars that were left behind played a great role at this time. The next night, dozens of figures with amazing auras descended from the sky, and several of them went straight for the statue in the center of the island. "Which race are you friends from?" A woman's voice was immediately heard from a shack at the edge of the island. More than a dozen spirit world experts from the foreign races immediately went to meet the people in the sky. However, when they realized that someone was going straight for the statue in the center of the island, these Negu people were shocked and angry. "What are you doing?" Boom! The huge statue in the center of the island was hit by a few figures and was immediately covered in cracks. "Protect the statue!" Many Negu people rushed out of the shacks and frantically rushed to the center of the island. "Just right," Lin Dong said softly as he looked at the cracked statue in the center of the island. This was his suggestion. Usually, this kind of totemic statue was an extremely important object. If they destroyed it immediately, the other party would go crazy. However, after the craziness subsided, they would probably flee when they realized that they were no match for them. Therefore, they had to make sure that the statue was damaged but not destroyed so that the foreign races would frantically come to protect the statue. This was the only way to eliminate all the foreign races on the island. At the same time, many Aboriginals who were already prepared at the periphery of the lake threw huge logs that they had cut down into the lake to use as stepping stones. At this moment, an extremely astonishing aura rose from the edge of the lake. "Humans, you really are the root of all trouble." "It's just as Shao Prince Consort said." With an angry roar, a six-armed figure with boundless power slammed into a human expert at the edge of the island. The two sides only exchanged a single blow before they separated. Gao Yi was sent flying with a look of horror, and the short spear in his hand also flew out. Only a long spear was left in his hand, and blood kept flowing out of the webbing between his thumb and index finger. What kind of demon dares to be so arrogant? A massive palm that was dozens of feet wide slammed down, and the sun, moon, and stars in the palm flickered with white light. Before the palm landed, it had already shot out. This was Su Gongso's extremely powerful move, and if he encountered other experts, these sun, moon, and stars would be enough to make them flustered and unable to deal with the palm above their heads. However, the six-armed figure held 4 steel sabers and slashed at the sky. The sun, moon, and stars all disappeared, and a hole was directly pierced through the giant palm. Fire! Spear! Ma Hongyu's brush danced in the air. Countless flaming spears appeared in the air and shot towards the back of the expert from the ancient clan. Stone! Sharp stone pillars protruded from the ground, sealing off the other party's range of movement. Su Gongso only had time to shout, "Be careful, this person is powerful." Flames, spears, and stone pillars all shattered. This is a tough nut to crack. This foreign race is actually so powerful. Gluttonous Duke gritted his teeth and untied a bag from his waist. He reached out and took out a pig's shoulder and threw it at the other party. Next was 8 treasures: rice, 12th moon porridge, roast chicken, beef leg, and grilled fish. Almost every dish was delicious. Chapter 929. There was a rumor in Jianghu that anyone who fought with gluttonous Bus would complain about it. That seemingly endless bag contained countless delicacies. When it attacked, not only could it use all kinds of methods, it could also bring with it a tempting aroma. Even if it was full, it would still arouse the gluttony in its stomach. Many of the great Xia experts used their methods, but the experts of the serpent race dashed left and right, causing their attacks to dissipate. Many aboriginal Earth-will experts crossed the lake one after another. First, they smashed the shacks and captured the old and young people who stayed behind to prevent them from escaping. The rest of the people surrounded the foreign race experts who had rushed to the center of the island. The human experts entangled with the experts of the serpent race. Other than facing the strongest expert of the serpent race, they weren't at a disadvantage in other aspects. The battle cries from both sides shook the sky. At this moment, Renbochin was faced with a strange silence amidst the warmth of the warmth. This matter originated from the last few times he came back. Firstly, Renbochin's parents hadn't heard the news of the Empress's pregnancy. Secondly, they hadn't seen her since they got married. Although it had only been a year in Dayo, almost 3 years had passed on Earth. Renbochin couldn't refuse and could only bring the Empress back to his hometown in the northeast. Now that the Empress was close to 12 months pregnant, her abdomen was still slightly bulging. If she wore an inner garment and a veil, it would be almost invisible. In addition to his parents, Ren Wanyan and his wife, Su Hongxiu, were also there. She had a delicate appearance, gave off a very clean feeling, and had a gentle personality. She was very enthusiastic when she saw them. Other than the occasional sound of acknowledgement, the Empress rarely spoke and had a cold expression. Other than when she was with Renbochin, she had this expression most of the time. It gave off the impression of arrogance, which was actually arrogance. Such a reaction made Su Hongxiu feel a little overwhelmed. She's always like this. Don't mind her. Renbochin chuckled, making Su Hongxiu feel flattered. Although Ren Wanyan was the boss of the most anticipated technology company on Earth, she also knew whose words carried more weight in this family. Furthermore, Renbochin didn't look like a good person, and his aura was much more powerful than Ren Wanyan's. When she looked at him, she didn't feel like she was looking at an invisible tycoon, but rather a high-ranking official. Zixiao, you keep rubbing your belly. Are you pregnant? Mama Ren asked fervently when she saw the Empress touching her belly occasionally. Her eyes were glowing. The Empress thought for a while, turned her head, and saw that Renbochin and Ren Wanyan had already gone to the side to talk. After thinking for a while, she nodded her head. Mama Ren was immediately overjoyed. After looking forward to it for so long, it was finally here. This eldest daughter-in-law was not like the youngest daughter-in-law, who could speak freely. Just looking at her made her feel a little breathless. This time, he had invited her to his house for a meal. He had made up his mind to ask her a few questions. Joyous occasion, truly joyous occasion. How long has it been? Mama Ren asked excitedly. 11 months and 17 days. Mother Ren, Su Hongxiu, 11 months and 17 days. Mama Ren repeated. Wasn't she supposed to be pregnant for 10 months? Could it be that his 2 sons were fake, 11 months and 17 days? The Empress said with certainty. Did you go to the hospital for a checkup? Mama Ren felt that she might have misunderstood something and changed the way she asked. I know my body very well, the Water Empress said calmly. Mother Ren, Su Hongxiu, Mama Ren decided to ask her son what was going on later. It was also thanks to this decision that she made. If she continued to ask and found out that the Empress's stomach was a ball, she would probably suspect that there was something wrong with the Empress's brain or her own. Not long after, seeing that Rinpochen was still talking, Mama Ren couldn't help but ask again. Is she pregnant? The Empress glanced at her, thought for a while, and replied, yes. Is it 4 months and 17 days? 11 months and 17 days. Mama Ren, it was better to ask her son later. After Rinpochen finished talking with his younger brother, he saw his mother coming over with a strange look on her face. What's wrong with your wife? Ha! Rinpochen was baffled. Do you know that she is pregnant? Mama Ren asked. Rinpochen's heart skipped a beat. He laughed dryly and asked, what did she say? I asked her if she was pregnant, and she said 11 months and 17 days. I even checked again and again to see if it was 4 months and 17 days, but she said it was 11 months. I have never heard of anyone not giving birth after being pregnant for so long. Her stomach doesn't look like it either. Do you want to take her to the hospital for a checkup? Mom, your northeastern accent is too heavy. She heard it as preparing for pregnancy. She has been preparing for pregnancy for 11 months and 17 days. You know that people have to prepare for pregnancy before they get pregnant. That's impossible. My Mandarin is famous for being accurate. Those who don't know would think that I'm from a television station. Mama Ren stared at her. What else do you think is going on? You said that she heard wrongly. Rinpochen spread his hands. Mama Ren thought about it suspiciously and asked with difficulty, 11 months and 17 days of preparation. That's quite a long time. Why aren't you pregnant yet? Do you want to go to the hospital for a checkup? Rinpochen's face turned black, and he cursed in his heart. However, he still explained seriously, I have checked, and there's no problem. Just wait for your grandchildren. Hongxiu has been pregnant for 3 months. You two have to hurry up. Your father and I are only looking forward to it now. Rinpochen had a headache and quickly nodded. Not long after, Rinpochen sat beside the Empress and smiled bitterly. What's wrong with your expression? Is it because of the ball in my stomach? The Empress said faintly. Her voice was directly transmitted to Rinpochen's ears, but no one else noticed. Your Majesty also knows about it. Being pregnant for more than 11 months is already a big problem for ordinary people, not to mention that your Majesty still hasn't given birth. This is too shocking for them. I disdain lying, the Empress said faintly. Rinpochen wasn't surprised. If you speak like an ordinary person and care about others, you wouldn't be my Empress. Upon hearing this answer, the Empress smiled. After staying at home for 2 days, they got along well. Although the Empress was cold, the only new family member, Su Hongxiu, was already used to it. Instead, she often shared her maintenance tips with the Empress and expressed surprise from time to time about how the Empress's skin was so tender and smooth. A few days later, Rinpochen and the Empress returned to Wuji City with some laboratory equipment. When they returned to Dao, they heard the news that Qi Ziding had led many Aboriginal experts and Great Xia experts to launch a surprise attack on the Nega race. One of the Great Xia experts was killed. It was Daoist Bai Yun, who was ranked 16th in the world and blocked the escape route of the enemy experts. At the same time, 11 people were seriously injured. 2 Aboriginal Cardinal Heaven experts were killed, and all of them were seriously injured. It could be said that the casualties were heavy. More than 30 Aboriginal Kismet Heaven experts were killed, and nearly 100 were injured. The 300 foreign races were either killed or captured. None of them managed to escape. It could be said that in this night attack, everyone first attacked the statue that the other party valued the most, delayed the other party's hands and feet, and suffered heavy losses even though they had the majority of experts and were surrounded by the aboriginals. Ma Hongyu, Su Gongso, Lin Dong, Fire Snake Tao Qian, and the others were seriously injured. The most important thing was that the other party had an expert who surpassed the spirit will level. If it weren't for Daoist Bai Yun's desperate efforts to hold him back and the other party's hesitation to retreat, this biggest enemy would probably have escaped. However, this was only a village of 300 foreign races. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.